Chapter 1194. I don't have much time left. Qin Guang muttered to himself. Then he discovered that the gazes of the two groups of mortals changed after the mission notification was given. The mortals panicked for a short while. Many of them extended their necks in bewilderment and looked around as though they were searching for something. Qin Guang knew that they were looking for him. There was no news of his death, so they hoped that he was still alive. It was a pity that their plans were in vain. He was standing in front of them, but they couldn't recognize him. As for the divine race, there were less than 20 of them left. Those who were able to survive until now weren't ordinary. They were the elites of the divine world and the experts of the experts. 5 short seconds later, the gods all came up with an idea. They either bought items or clenched their teeth and pressed the strengthening button. Then their bodies glowed with light and their auras rose. Peasant realized that he couldn't find Mr. Dang. He turned his head and shouted, "Everyone be alert. This is the last mission. Since there's no news of Mr. Dang's death, he must be alive. Even if he can't help us due to certain reasons, we're much stronger than before. We have to learn to rely on ourselves." "That's right, it's time to show our true abilities," the genius student said as he stood up and shouted to the crowd. The genius middle school student said as he stood up and said loudly to the crowd, "Everyone who has completed the third awakening, if you are interested in trying my methods, you can come over here. I can help you strengthen your abilities, but the numbers are limited. First come, first serve." The genius youth was finally willing to reveal his abilities. Although everyone had already guessed it, it was still too unbelievable. "Really?" The card magician came up to him and asked happily. "Oh, I forgot to mention that besides the few of you, the rest can try." "What do you mean?" The card magician was unhappy. The young genius glanced at him and said, "Nothing much. I don't like you, so I'm unhappy. It's that simple." The magician was furious, but he didn't have a chance to protest. The hale and hearty old man, Fireball Magician, and the others gathered around. The old man looked at him with a serious face. "Time is tight. Let's not dawdle and hurry up." The Fireball Mage, on the other hand, asked, "Little brother, how many people can you use your ability?" "Sorry to trouble you." The young genius stretched out 5 fingers. 5, but I have to say this up front. When I'm adjusting your awakened abilities, you must have complete trust in me. Also, I can't guarantee that the effects will be positive after using it. Just like a brother in my team who was tricked by me. That's why he didn't live until now. I can't do anything about it. Are you kidding me? You can't guarantee the effect and you still want others to trust you wholeheartedly? Forget it, I can't do it anyway. Just pretend I didn't say anything." The card magician cursed and turned to leave. Seeing this, the young genius shrugged indifferently. "See, I knew it would be like this. God knows how lucky these people are to be able to survive until now. Right, let's start now." The young man clapped his hands and urged. The rest of them looked at each other for a while. The hale and hearty elder stood out and said, "Let me try first." The rest didn't argue with him. Not everyone was willing to expose their abilities to others. Besides, they knew that with their suspicious nature, it was hard for them to trust others. The process wasn't complicated. The young genius tapped the elder's forehead. After a few seconds, he released his finger. The elder didn't say anything. He turned his head and sat down at the side. Someone asked the elder how the situation was, but he smiled and didn't say anything. He didn't say anything good or bad. While the rest were hesitating, Peasant gritted her teeth and walked forward. "Let me do it." The young genius' eyes lit up. "Compared to the rest, I'm more curious to know what changes will happen to Miss Peasant's ability. I know you can control time." There was an uproar. In many novels, the ability to control time was the highest level ability. In Xuanhuan novels, the rule of time was higher than the rule of space. "How did you know?" The elf magician archer knocked an arrow and aimed at the young genius. The young genius shrugged nonchalantly and said, "When I sprayed the mosquito repellent, I felt uncomfortable for a short while. Then I felt like I was pressed on the slow button. I can't explain the feeling, but I know it's real. I've been observing everyone. Besides Miss Peasant, the rest of them have displayed their abilities. Miss Peasant is holding an hourglass in her hand. Besides the ability to control time, what else can she do? I'm not a fool." "Alright, stop talking. There's not much time left," Peasant interrupted them and urged them. She gritted her teeth and closed her eyes. The young genius did the same. She gritted her teeth and closed her eyes. The young genius did the same. On the other side, Qin Guang had already decided to make the first move. He tried to take a step forward in an attempt to kill his way to the Protoss. Just as he had this thought, he discovered that he couldn't move. It was as though he was stuck in cement. He was locked on by the massacre mission. Since he couldn't move, his attempt to communicate by writing was futile. Forget it, 3 minutes it is. They can't defy the heavens even if it's 3 minutes. Qin Guang thought worriedly as he looked at the two camps. He was in a dilemma. He didn't care about the gods as long as they were pecked to death. However, the mortals were a huge problem. The poker lads and the MMA instructor were jackals of the same tribe. It was fine if they were killed. The old man and his companions felt apologetic, but they wouldn't be bothered even if they were pecked to death. The magical beast trio had similar thoughts. It wouldn't be a problem for the mean student to be gnawed to death. As for peasant AI, Qin Guang was in a dilemma when he thought about it. Could it be that he really had to destroy a flower? That wasn't the old man's style. He felt that peasant was an acquaintance of his from the outside world. After such a long time he had guessed her identity, but he didn't reveal it. His body was filming the variety show. Hi. My God. Near the filming site. When the world in the cup descended, if a few gifted mortals were to be sucked in, Zhou Xian, who was the closest to him, would be the first to be sucked in. Hence, peasant was most likely Zhou Xian. Qin Guang didn't have time to reveal it, but he couldn't do so now. Based on the principle of a dead friend, and a dead friend, Qin Guang was worried about the meaning of the reset. If it was to wipe out all the memories and turn a person into a retard, it would be a huge sin. He would be letting down the party and the people as well as the motherland. It would also cause Tianguang Media, which was in a bad situation, to lose its backbone. This old man's heart is really tormented right now. It's really hard for me to do this. Gosh. They are trying to kill me. As Qin Guang was muttering to himself, the Celestials and Mortals had completed their preparations. Compared to before the start of Mission 8, the surviving 40 players were like a completely different person. Whether it was their attire or their aura, they had undergone a complete transformation. The standard battle uniforms that everyone was wearing were long gone. What replaced them were all kinds of divine equipment that each person had made for themselves. They were either wearing shiny armor in the style of Western magic, or feather fans and silk scarves that were filled with the flavor of Eastern Xianxia. They were also wearing the bright silver chainmail that Xian was wearing, or the jade-like elven leather armor that flashed with green light that the female elf archer was wearing. The Celestials were even scarier. Qin Guang was afraid. Yu Ting's face was indiscernible. His entire body was covered in lightning and thunder armor. Wethany had also changed into a bright blue robe. Perhaps it was not the right size, but it dragged a few meters behind her. With Qin Guang's years of gaming experience, he could tell that these guys were equipped with godly equipment that was at least +12 or +18. Damn it, when this old man was protecting all of you from acting tough, all of you were hiding your true strength. Now that you're making things difficult for me, all of you can't wait to take out all of your capital. Has your conscience been eaten by a dog? As he complained, his body suddenly lightened. He could move again. The 3-minute wait was over. F***CK. Goo. Qin Guang cursed and rushed towards the Celestials. He had not thought of how to deal with the mortals yet, but killing the Celestials first was definitely not a bad idea. Out of habit, he took a step forward. Then he prepared to take a horse stance and unleash a palm strike that could topple mountains and overturn seas. However, when he unleashed it, he realized that he had no palm, only chicken wings. It was pigeon wings. The huge wings of the pigeon suddenly spun along with his body, and when they flapped forward, they brought up a scarlet whirlwind. The visible red whirlwind carried a thick stench of blood as it swept towards the Celestials. He did not use the earth-shattering palm, but he did use the blood pigeon's innate ability, Sea of Blood. But at this time the Shin clan was not to be trifled with. They remained calm in the face of danger. One by one they leaped up at an extremely fast speed. It was like the 8 immortals crossing the sea, each displaying their own remarkable abilities. At this moment, Qin Guang's massive body had slowed down his movements. Thus his first wing, which seemed to be powerful, missed. In the next moment, a bolt of lightning struck his head, charring a few feathers on his head. Raising his head, Qin Guang saw that the lightning came from the tip of Yu Ting's spear, which was hovering not too far away. At the same time, he fiercely lowered his head, only to see that the Colosseum floor under his feet had abruptly turned into a soft swamp. His 2 claws were continuously sinking into the soft swamp mud that was suffused with green light. The swamp extended from where he was standing all the way to where Wethany was. It was her dress that was playing tricks on him. Not only that, but this brief moment of entrapment immediately caused him to be enveloped by countless attacks. All sorts of dazzling and powerful attacks landed on his body. Some of them were light enough to scratch an itch, but some were like Yu Ting's lightning, causing seemingly minute but accumulating damage. For a moment, Qin Guang was at a disadvantage because he was not used to the blood pigeon's body. There was more bad news. The Celestials had taken the initiative. Logically, the mortals should just sit back and watch. However, because the quest notification clearly stated that the final quest reward would be calculated based on the amount of damage each person dealt, no one was willing to slack off. Everyone used their trump cards one after another. The old man and his companions hid in the Apocalypse tank, which had a few black and thick tubes attached to it. With the old man's command, the Apocalypse tank buzzed, and the 8 thick tubes lit up at the same time. In an instant, 2 depleted uranium supermagnetic storm bombs flew out. 2 light blue ion beams with a high-temperature burning effect shot out. 4 Gatling guns fired wildly at Qin Guang, and the heavy lead core bullets rained down on Qin Guang. As for the others, there were big fireballs, deadly flying daggers, King of Hearts, and so on. Peasant didn't charge forward personally. Instead, he stood beside the elven archer. No one knew what he was up to. The elven archer knocked an arrow, while Peasant held an hourglass in one hand and placed his fingertips on the tail of the elven archer's magic arrow. There was a swishing sound. The elven archer released her fingers, and the magic arrow that was in front of her seemed to traverse space and appear between the eyebrows of Qin Guang's blood pigeon body. After the mutation of his awakened abilities, Peasant was able to use time acceleration on the magic arrow of the elven archer. Qin Guang felt that he was about to cry. "I'm seeing a ghost. Do you have to be so ruthless? Why didn't I see you being so capable?" Chapter 1195. Qin Guang flicked his head and pecked away the magic arrows that were right in front of him. At the same time, he racked his brain to think of a way to change the situation. After discovering that he was the final boss, he was momentarily at a loss and fell into a rather awkward situation. These people were too aggressive. They were completely different from when he was still around as a nanny. Faced with the final quest, almost all the players seemed to be on steroids. After all, everyone was determined to clear Quest 9 and leave this godforsaken place happily. As for the rewards that they would receive after completing all the tests, and whether they could leave this place alive, it wasn't something that they cared about. The quest notification specifically mentioned that this blood pigeon was very powerful and terrifying. Therefore, they couldn't let their guard down. They had to give it their all from the very beginning. They couldn't afford to be careless. From the beginning, there were close to 100 people who entered the quest. Now there were less than 50 people who survived. No one dared to be careless and seek their own death. Of course, there was nothing wrong with the player's attitude. However, Qin Guang, who had transformed into a blood pigeon, was suffering. His current situation was very similar to when he fought the final boss in World of Warcraft. The players had to use all of their abilities to attack the boss. His current state was very similar to when he was fighting in a dungeon. He had transformed into a boss that could only move according to the system's settings. He struggled and roared, waving his frightening weapons. However, the players could easily dodge his attacks if they followed the rules. As for the players, they dealt as much damage as they did in the game. Although there wasn't a clear division of classes, the way they displayed their abilities was very similar to that of an online game. However, this boss wasn't a brainless NPC that was completely controlled by a computer program. Instead, it was Qin Guang who had a brain of flesh and blood and could scold people. He couldn't even remember how many times he had cursed in that instant, but it was of no use. What was even more shameful was that in the players' hearts, this gigantic blood pigeon was the final boss. From the very beginning, everyone had treated him as an almost invincible existence, and they had used all their might to bombard him. Unfortunately, the real boss had suddenly changed into a completely unfamiliar body, and now he felt extremely uncomfortable. Of course, the body of a human was completely different from that of a bird. Qin Guang found it awkward to use the various invincible martial arts that he was familiar with. Furthermore, the swamp that Withany had conjured was quite disgusting. Although it did not seem to cause him any harm, It could trap his claws and render him unable to move. If he was still in human form, Qin Guang would probably be able to fly out with a light body technique. But now he was like a bloated pigeon. What was even more irritating was that his feet were completely soft, and there was not even a place for him to stand on. Apart from that, a powerful suction force came from beneath his feet, dragging him down. The attacks of the mortal players from afar were like a thunderstorm, never stopping for a moment. Qin Guang's feet were trapped, so he could only flap his wings to block the colorful attacks coming from all directions. Fortunately, even though it was not convenient for him to use the unique skills of the human race, the blood pigeon did have some special abilities. Even a simple flap of its wings could create a bloody whirlwind with a strong smell of blood. Could filter out most of the less powerful attacks in advance. Even the particle cannons from the Apocalypse tank were weakened when they passed through the crimson whirlwinds. The more substantial damage, like the cannonballs and bullets, were able to penetrate the whirlwinds and hit the huge body of the blood pigeon. Though sparks flew, they didn't cause any substantial damage to Qin Guang. The real threat was the mana arrows shot by the elven archers. After peasant use time acceleration on the arrows, the powerful mana arrows became even more mysterious and difficult to capture. They flew at a frightening speed. It was as if the distance between them didn't exist. Thereafter, that delicate lady was ruthless and her arrows were all aimed at Qin Guang's vitals. They were aimed at his eyebrows, his eyes, and his neck. Qin Guang looked at the aggressive mana arrows and didn't dare to hit them. The attacks of the gods were also troubling him. Yu Ting's lightning bolts bombarded his body as though they weren't charging electricity. The rest of the gods threw fireballs, ice cubes, and even fruits. Of course, there were also a bunch of demons that bared their fangs and brandished their claws, shooting various unknown energies. Coincidentally, no one or the god race was interested in taking another step forward. Even those whose awakened abilities didn't allow for long-range attacks chose to spend their last bit of reward points to purchase consumables with long-range attacks from the merchant shop. The Tang Sect's sky-blasting thunder, thunderbolt, and Zhuge repeating crossbows were used. Some crazy galactic enthusiasts even took out their laser guns and aimed them at Qin Guang. Qin Guang had seen these items in his merchant shop. He even saw the legendary force field shield, which was sold for 100,000 reward points. If he could exchange for it, it would be much easier. It was a pity that he could only dream about it. Yu Ting's lightning bolt struck his head again. Qin Guang was anxious. He couldn't let this continue. Otherwise, he would be killed by the combined attacks of the two factions. This was because he found that after he transformed into a blood pigeon, the invincible talent of the earth paste exploder had disappeared inexplicably. He wasn't sure if his blood pigeon avatar would be able to revert back to its original form when it was killed. It would be great if he could revert back to his original form, but if he were to die tragically in the boss state, it would be too miserable. He didn't dare to take the risk. At this moment he suddenly had an idea, and a rather strange memory came to his mind. It was a rather strange martial emperor's unique skill that he had learned in the realm of true martial. It was called Condor Fighting Technique. It came from a non-human martial emperor called the Condor Hero. At that time, Qin Guang complained that this character must have been derived from Elder Jinns, the Condor Heroes, by the heavenly Holy Grail. There was nothing wrong with this, but it was very difficult for him to learn Brother Condor's moves in human form. He had put in a lot of effort and spent almost 5 times the time of learning other ultimate skills before he managed to master this bird-type martial emperor's ultimate skill. Unfortunately, he had never used it since then. Now was the time. Sure enough, as soon as he tried to circulate the inner strength in his body, the originally very uncomfortable and blocked meridians suddenly became accessible in all directions, and he could do as he pleased. Qin Guang didn't rush to use the unique skill. Instead, he recalled the process of learning the Condor Fighting Technique in his mind. Although his mind was sealed in the realm of true martial, he still had hundreds of thousands of years' worth of memories. Even if they were solidified in his mind, he had to recall them slowly like a computer reading data. As he recalled, he continued to resist the player's attacks. Finally, after about 10 minutes, he had completely recalled the entire Condor Fighting Technique in his mind. In order to achieve a foolproof effect, he even tried to hypnotize himself. To be precise, he used world-class acting skills. He instilled an extremely strong idea into his mind. Next, the old man was going to act as a bird. It only took about 2 seconds for him to fully immerse himself in the role. Immediately, the players who had been happily attacking him seemed to have sensed the sudden change in his aura, and they all sensed it. Is this bastard on steroids? Why do I feel that something is wrong? The soldier carrying the big sniper had already walked out of his apocalypse tank. His treasure had run out of energy. But their firepower didn't weaken, including the old man. At this time, all of them were wearing individual combat armor about 3 meters tall. Each of them looked like miniature Gundams. These Gundams each carried a new type of big sniper which was quite powerful and caused a lot of trouble for Qin Guang. On the other side, the fat household appliance also poked his head out of his super large electric crane and said loudly, "The pigeon's eyes have changed. It's glowing red." The genius high school student sitting next to the fat household appliance frowned. At first he didn't say a word, but then he suddenly shouted, "Hurry up and leave." "What? I told you to hurry up and leave. Jump down from here. We can't stay here anymore." The fat household appliance didn't know what was going on. He subconsciously wanted to refuse the genius high school student's suggestion. In order to make this large crane, he had almost exhausted all of his energy. Now every time he used it to throw the super large sealed freezer at the pigeon, he had to burn a lot of reward points. This crane was his baby, the ultimate product that he could summon with his third awakening ability. How could he give it up just like that? But the genius high school student didn't give him a chance to think. Without saying a word, he grabbed his collar, opened the door, and jumped out of the control tower that was more than 30 meters tall. "Why is this happening?" the fat household appliance shouted in mid-air. "No reason, we're going to die if we don't leave." The genius high school student answered him concisely. On the other side, the shield warrior Azeroth shouted to the beast tamer hunter, "Hurry up and let your gorilla use rapid charge on the pigeon." The beast tamer executed the order without thinking. The gorilla that had been standing beside him roared, then charged forward like a cannonball. It even slid across the swamp, then raised its arms and slammed them down at the swamp in front of the blood pigeon. When the gorilla swung its arms, bolts of lightning appeared on its fists. It was very similar to the skill of the Hill King in the Warcraft series, Thunderclap. The boss is about to enter the second stage. The Fireball Magician knew what was good for him, as expected of an experienced online player. The Protoss players also noticed the changes in the boss, but unlike the ordinary players, they were more confident. Yu Ting even secretly used God's language to communicate with the others. "Fight to the death, this is a good chance to snatch the quest completion points." Qin Guang's blood-red eyes suddenly lit up. At this moment his mind was in a half-human, half-bird state. He muttered something, but actually he was complaining about Yu Ting's wishful thinking. "You're all corpses and you still want to snatch the quest completion points from me?" In the blink of an eye, the blood pigeon, which had a third of its body sunk into the swamp, suddenly spread its wings, but it didn't flap downwards. The next moment, the long blood-red feathers on its wings stood up. "It's going to use its ultimate skill," the genius high school student shouted. The fat electrical appliance worker didn't have time to think. He raised his hand and summoned a large pile of old electrical appliances, piling them in front of the two of them as cover. A moment later, a red light suddenly appeared behind the cover in front of the two of them, like the sun rising from the east. Under the horrified gazes of Yu Ting and the other Protoss players, the tens of thousands of feathers on the blood pigeon suddenly transformed into countless javelins that shot out from its wings. These long feather javelins were so densely packed that the Protoss players closest to it couldn't avoid them. That wasn't the end of it. Every feather exploded halfway through its flight, turning into even more feathers that rained down on the entire Colosseum. Qin Guang's ultimate skill from the Condor art of fighting was called Thousand Feathers Slash. The situation immediately reversed and all the players were in danger. The first to die on the spot was the gorilla in front of him that had tried to stun him. Sorry, but as a boss, the old man was completely immune to stun-type control skills. The gorilla was first turned into a sieve, then it fell to the ground. A tombstone even appeared on the ground. Wethany, who was a little further away, saw that the situation wasn't looking good. She immediately retreated into the swamp beneath her. She managed to completely hide in the ground before the rain of needles descended, but there were still many feathers chasing after her. She didn't know if she could survive that. The other Terran players further away were also in chaos. The fat electrical appliance worker's beloved tower crane was instantly destroyed by the rain of needles. The old man and his companions conjured a huge metal shield in their hands. They formed a shield formation to protect themselves before the rain of needles descended. The card magician and his companions were in a worse state. The inferior force field shield that they purchased didn't last more than 5 seconds before it shattered. They had to use all their means to protect themselves. They could be considered lucky in Qin Guang's benevolence. The number of feathers that fell to their side wasn't much. As long as they are not so selfish and willing to spend the reward points in their pockets, or the valuable high-priced life-saving props that they have exchanged before, they can barely survive. Peasant and the elf archer had it much easier. Peasant used his mutated time ability to form a semicircular shield in front of them. The archers, on the other hand, switched to explosive fire magic arrows, shooting at the feathers that had been slowed down in the time shield, burning them to ashes before they could even land. The ones who suffered the most were the weaker ordinary Protoss players who were relatively close to the blood pigeons. After the chaos, there was a moment of silence in the Colosseum. Peasant and the elf archer dodged the burning feathers that fell from the sky. They looked forward and were shocked. The previously lively Protoss players were now sprawled on the ground. 3 or 4 of them were completely dead while 7 or 8 were struggling with great difficulty. As for Yu Ting, his face was covered in dirt as he ran around. Every time he passed by a Protoss player, he would exchange for an expensive healing pill and stuff it into their mouths, regardless of whether they were dead or alive. Wethany crawled out of the swamp, her face covered in blood. Her body was riddled with wounds and she looked like she had been ravaged. Seeing this, Yu Ting hurriedly returned and stuffed the healing medicine into her mouth. However, when she touched her body, her arm fell to the ground first. "Lord Yuding, I'm going to die," Vesani said in despair. Yu Ting frowned. "What are you talking about? It's only the loss of a projection. I won't let you die so easily." Yu Ting did not particularly care about the lives of the other celestial players, but in the celestial realm, Wethany was his vanguard general. Yu Ting did not want to lose his right-hand man so early on in this game quest that made him feel powerless. On the other side, the Protoss players who could still move suddenly retreated a few steps. Yu Ting turned around and saw the blood pigeon, whose wings were now bare, slowly walk out of the swamp pit that had solidified again. Behind the blood pigeon was a bloody aura. Chapter 1196. Even though the gamers were of different races, they could feel the anger of the pigeon. They didn't know if it was a herbivorous magical beast or a carnivorous magical beast, but they felt that the pigeon wanted to eat humans. The earth-shattering blood chi flickered with a dark red radiance and soared into the sky. It was as if it was going to completely envelop the blue sky. It had to be said that the spectators and stands of the Colosseum had been made into mosaics. It was quite crude, but the sky looked quite exquisite. It didn't look beautiful. Instead, it accentuated the terrifying smell of blood coming from the blood pigeon. The dignified divine King Yu Ting was stared at by the crimson eyes of the blood pigeon, but he didn't have the majesty he had in the godly realm. He felt his hair stand on end and his heart tremble involuntarily. This feeling was as oppressive as when he faced the majesty of the divine king in the godly realm. It might even be stronger. It was so strong that he couldn't resist it. Everyone retreat. The human gamers weren't righteous enough to help the gods. Peasant was the first to react. He shouted and retreated with the elf archer and the other 2 girls without looking back. The other gamers reacted quickly. The fat household appliance gamer conjured an electric scooter for the genius high school student to sit with him. With a whoosh, the scooter dashed to the edge of the Colosseum. The genius high school student couldn't help but complain. An electric scooter is considered a household appliance? Of course, it's a 220-volt charger. Why can't it be considered a household appliance? That's King reasonable. I'm convinced. Naturally, Qin Guang, who had transformed into a bird, could hear the conversation between the 2 of them. He nearly laughed out loud and lost his cultivation. Gosh, the 2 of them are destroying my killing intent. On the other side, the old man and the others in the Gundam armor also quickly threw away the steel shields that were riddled with holes from the needles and feathers. They turned around and crawled to the ground. Then 4 wheels fell off their shoulders and they turned into motorcycles. Their motors roared as they charged forward to escape. Their movements were quite swift and fierce. As for the card magicians group, after being severely injured, 2 of them died on the spot. The other 3, including the magician, gritted their teeth and crawled to escape in panic. The 3 Warcraft players were slower. Although they did not suffer too much damage under the cover of Azenotha's shield and the magician's dragon breath, the beast tamer was traumatized by the loss of his beloved pet. If not for his two companions holding him back, he would have charged forward without a care in the world. However, they managed to react in time, summoning their own mounts and running away. As soon as the mounts of these three fellows appeared, Qin Guang almost failed again. Damn it, you guys are veterans of the T7 set. Why don't you guys exchange for some reliable mounts? 3 chocobos popped out from the crotch of the 3 men, squawked and scampered off. The scene was extremely comical and out of control. The human players were further away, so they were not heavily injured. They were able to escape quickly, but the Protoss were not so lucky. More than half of the Protoss were heavily injured and their fates were unknown. Even though Yu Ting had fed them medicine, they would not recover in a short period of time. Yu Ting had not even finished feeding everyone their medicine. At that moment, most of his attention was on the dying Vesni in his arms. Even gods could be selfish. Yu Ting's choice was understandable. The blood pigeons behind him were getting more and more intimidating, and they were already charging towards him. Yu Ting had no time to hesitate. He gritted his teeth and made a decision. He could no longer care about the other Protoss. He carried Vesni's broken body and flew away, fleeing into the distance. The blood pigeon that Qin Guang had transformed into let out a squawk and gave chase. As a pigeon, it could fly under normal circumstances. However, its wings were bare, so it could not fly even if it wanted to. However, it wasn't slow at all. Rather than calling it a pigeon, its short legs swished as it ran as if it had eaten stride. It was as fast as a bolt of red lightning, chasing after Yu Ting and Wethany. Qin Guang, who had completely hypnotized himself into a blood pigeon, had both the intelligence of a human and the battle instincts of a phantom beast. Among all the players, Vesni's attack power was almost non-existent. However, her swamp special skill could cause the most trouble for Qin Guang. Kill the biggest threat first. This was the simplest battle philosophy of a high-level phantom beast, the blood pigeon. So without hesitation he chose to chase after Yu Ting and Vesni. As for the other players, he could deal with them later. However, Yu Ting was not to be trifled with. Now that he had control over lightning, he could run as fast as lightning. He held Vesni in one hand and held a spear in the other. Plasma sprouted from the bottom of the spear, and the plasma surged into the shape of a flying carpet, which he stepped on. While running, Yu Ting did not care about the cost. He bought healing items and stuffed them into Vesni's mouth, or sprayed her with a spray. Qin Guang chased after Yu Ting for a while, but not only was he unable to catch up to Yu Ting, even Vesni was slowly coming back to life. Her severed arm had regrown white bones, and with these bones as a foundation, flesh and blood were slowly growing back. The countless holes on her body were also healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Seeing that Yu Ting had even put Wethany down, the annoying Lolita goddess was standing on the plasma carpet beneath Yu Ting. She even turned around and made a face at Qin Guang. Qin Guang decided not to chase after her. He immediately turned around and headed for the center of the Colosseum. There were still many Celestials lying there. Some of the Celestials had already crawled up and fled, but there were still some who were struggling to save themselves and had not yet recovered. As Qin Guang ran, he used the innate ability of the blood pigeon, a phantom boss. Although its regenerative ability was far inferior to that of the Earth Marmalade Exploder, it was easy for it to regrow its feathers. As he deliberately activated his talent, his wings, which were so bald that they could be roasted and eaten, first surged with red blood. As the light flickered, the red blood quickly covered his entire wing, and in the blink of an eye, it turned back into feathers. This time the blood pigeon that Qin Guang had transformed into finally learned how to fly. It flapped its wings and soared into the sky. A strong gust of wind accompanied the blood pigeon's flight, and it brought pain to those who saw it. Just the wind caused by the flapping of its wings could cause damage. After Qin Guang had completely adapted to its body, the blood pigeon's strength was evident. Yu Ting, who was running away, saw that the situation was not good. He quickly turned around and shouted, "Run!" 2 or 3 of the Celestials on the ground struggled to get up when they heard this, and ran forward regardless of the consequences. Another 3 or 5 Celestials even struggled to save their companions, but most of the Celestials were still lying on the ground. They were either on the verge of death or had no strength to get up. After a short period of chaos, The blood pigeon that Qin Guang had transformed into had already flown above them. Then the blood pigeon opened its beak and like a machine gun, it spat out thumb-sized chunks of qi. Those who didn't know what was going on would think that it was science fiction, and Qin Guang himself felt very awkward. No one would believe it, but this move was also a unique skill in the condor fighting technique called spitting grape seeds. That's right, this was the name. It was quite simple and crude. What he was spitting out now was a sharp cone of qi called grape seeds. If Qin Guang were to name it himself, he would probably rename it Bird Beak Gatling Gun. Obviously it was more fitting. As he released this ultimate move, the chunks of qi were like machine guns firing at the ground, and the celestials on the ground were immediately hit hard. Those who could still move either tried to dodge or use the items they had exchanged from the shop to protect themselves, but it was of little use. After a round of intensive shooting, the blood pigeon glided back to the ground, leaving behind only a piece of farmland that looked like it had been plowed by 8 oxen repeatedly. After Yu Ting put down Wethany, he rushed to the spot, and his face turned ashen when he saw the tragic scene. Previously, several Protoss had already died in battle. After such a torment, there were less than 10 Protoss who survived. The blood pigeon was not in a hurry to launch its next attack. Instead, it turned around and opened its beak again. Yu Ting thought that it was going to spit something again and was shocked. He was about to turn around and run. But in the end, the blood pigeon did not spit anything. Instead, it took a deep breath in his direction. About 100 meters in front of Yu Ting, there seemed to be a black hole in the blood pigeon's beak. The strong suction made people feel like they were in the center of a tornado. Seeing that the situation was not good, Yu Ting quickly dodged to the side. In the process, he quickly picked up the remaining celestials on the ground and threw them far away. As for those who were already dead, he had no time to care about them. But he did not know that Qin Guang's real target was not the living celestials, but those who were already dead. Just now, he had planned to spit grape seeds again and plow the ground again, but suddenly he faintly smelled a scent from the dead celestials that made his blood boil. It felt like a smoker who had failed to quit smoking and smelled smoke after 3 days, or like an old drunkard who suddenly had a large glass of pure Maotai wine in front of him. It was quite addictive. Therefore, he used a move from the condor fighting technique called swallowing mountains and rivers. As the name suggested, the key to swallowing mountains and rivers was to use internal energy as a driving force, using the well-developed lungs of birds as an air pump to crazily absorb the air from the outside world into one's body. Back then, Brother Condor had used this move to deal with the siege of nearly 1,000 martial artists. After using it, almost all the energy in the bodies of nearly 1,000 martial artists was sucked dry in a short period of time, causing them to completely lose the ability to resist. Right now, Qin Guang wanted to use this move to try and absorb the divine power released by the Protoss who were already dead and in the process of disintegrating into energy form. Of course, there was a side effect that was not very elegant. According to the law of conservation of matter, where there was an input, there must be an output. As for the method and place of the output, this was basically no different from when he was in his human form. Other than the mouth and nose, there was only one place on an animal's body that could still exhale. As a result, colorful smoke rose from nearly 10 places on the rapidly recovering Colosseum. Accompanied by the blood pigeons swallowing mountains and rivers, the smoke flew into its mouth. Under Yu Ting's extremely pained gaze, the divine power released by the celestials was all sucked into the blood pigeon's mouth. However, it was not absorbed by him. Instead, it turned into colorful light that rushed out from the back of the blood pigeon and completely integrated into the slaughtering world. Yu Ting could not help but feel sad. The dignified and respected gods in the endless god realm had actually suffered such a great humiliation in this stupid mission. Not only did they die, they actually had to be eaten by this magical beast and then burst out from the back. What is your intention in doing this? If it was not for the fact that the other party could only croak, Yu Ting really wanted to scold it. In fact, even Qin Guang himself did not know what the point of doing this was. He subconsciously felt that filtering the celestial's power out of his body would definitely be beneficial. However, when he carefully examined it, he felt that the benefits were completely undetectable. It was somewhat similar to the situation when they encountered the giant mosquito formation. The only difference was that in the giant mosquito formation, the giant mosquito first changed the nature of the celestial's power, then he did the filtering. Now he had become the mission boss, and the whole process was a one-stop service. Forget it. Since he could not figure it out, there was no need to continue dwelling on it. There was definitely no harm in doing this. Qin Guang turned his head and once again focused his attention on Yu Ting. At this time the other surviving celestials had mostly recovered and gathered behind Yu Ting. Facing the blood pigeon's eyes that seemed to want to devour someone, Yu Ting and the other celestials slowly calmed down from their initial panic. Blindly running away would not change their fate. The power of this blood pigeon was just as the mission description said. It was so powerful that there was no room for carelessness. Both sides had only fought for 2 to 3 rounds, and half of the celestials had perished. Everyone, do you really want to wait until all of us are dead before showing your true power? Do you think you can take advantage of our deaths? It won't be that easy, right? Yu Ting said loudly without turning his head as he stared at the blood pigeon with all his attention. Everyone knew that he was talking to the mortal gamers. The mortal gamers looked at each other before focusing their gazes on the old geezer. At this critical moment they believed that the older the ginger was, the spicier it was. They would let the older gamers make the decisions. The old geezer hesitated for a while before gritting his teeth and saying, "Let's not hide our abilities. If the celestials are all dead we won't have a good time." Qin Guang was anxious. He had not made up his mind to kill the old geezer and his companions, especially Peasant. Now that he had created a situation where he could wipe out the celestials, how could he allow the mortals to interfere? He did not attack the celestials immediately. Instead he flapped his wings and flew backward. Then he lifted his claws. He began to write on the ground. "Human friends, don't panic. Though I'm a blood pigeon, I'm a peaceful dove. I'm a peace-loving dove. The celestials came from another dimension and aren't from this universe. They are the natural enemies of us, so we have to kill them. You and I are of the same race, so we can coexist peacefully." Qin Guang wrote the words on the ground swiftly and flew to the side. He changed his mind. He did not intend to tell the mortals that he was Noon. If he had to kill the human gamers, he had no choice. The hunter summoned his magic warhawk and flew over. Then he used his shared magical vision to read the words on the ground clearly and read them out loud. "Gosh. The perverted blood pigeon is trying to sway us. And it's intelligent. And it's written in Chinese. And it's written beautifully. It's so cunning." After the beast tamer finished reading, he couldn't help but start complaining. Qin Guang, who was flying in the air, nearly plummeted to the ground. "I'm really seeing a ghost. There's something wrong with good writing?" He had boasted that he was a peaceful dove. Why didn't they believe him? Chapter 1197. The result of the fruitless communication was that when there were less than 10 Protoss players left, the two camps finally joined forces. This was the situation that Qin Guang had been trying to create. He did not expect that it would finally happen. However, the one they were going to deal with was him. This was an awkward feeling. Qin Guang, who had turned into a blood pigeon, no longer wanted to complain about himself. Right now he only wanted to destroy the Protoss as soon as possible. As for the human players, he would be merciful and allow them to be willful one more time. There was no other way. The old man was just that kind and generous. After filtering the divine power of the dead Protoss players, he immediately flapped his wings and flew into the sky, causing all the attacks from the human players to miss. At the same time he put himself in an invincible position. Looking at the many opponents on the ground, Qin Guang felt a sense of accomplishment as a boss for the first time. "Have you ever seen something like this before? The old man can fly. Are you afraid?" While he was gloating, Yu Ting, who was on the ground, also leaped into the air. Qin Guang immediately remembered that Yu Ting could also transform into lightning and fly into the air. From the looks of it, Yu Ting was no longer a coward and wanted to fight him head-on. Qin Guang narrowed his pigeon eyes and looked down at Yu Ting, trying to guess his motives and what he was relying on. It was obvious that Yu Ting was no match for him. Where did he get the courage to fly into the air and attack him? He took a closer look. Sure enough, the remaining Protoss players, who were scattered in various corners of the Colosseum, had unknowingly formed a formation on the ground. Faint but eerie blue threads were connected to these Protoss players. Not only that, but as time passed, these originally single threads gradually grew more and more branches. These branches were connected together. In addition, there were nearly 10 Protoss at the center of the array. Gradually, the huge Colosseum was filled with an enchanting yet beautiful magic array. "I've stalled him. Mortal friends, I have just used up all my reward points to purchase this magic array. This tool is called No Pigeons Under the Heavens. It can gather the power of everyone standing in the magic array. Please take the initiative to stand in the center of the hexagram. Only by gathering everyone's power will we be able to control it. Yu Ting, who was originally on the ground, roared. Lightning surged from his body once more and he soared into the sky, charging towards Qin Guang. Qin Guang heard his words clearly and found it funny. He thought that he was really a fantasy beast and couldn't understand human language. Do you think I'll let you comfortably store your ultimate move? Do you take me for a fool? Also, do you think those human players will fall for your tricks? God knows what tricks you have up your sleeves. Perhaps the moment ordinary players step into this formation, they will be firmly controlled by you and become nutrients for your doomless formation. How could the old man's players be so stupid? Impossible. Holy sh**T, you guys are so honest. They didn't even bother to check and just stepped in like that? Since when did you guys become so simple and honest? Under Qin Guang's dumbfounded gaze, nearly 20 human players stepped into the eye of the magic array without hesitation. In the blink of an eye, the magic array that only covered the celestial players suddenly became even more dazzling. The mysterious patterns on the magic array continued to grow like spring buds. In less than 2 seconds, the colossal bestial battle arena was completely occupied by Yu Ting's no pigeons under the heavens magic array. As for Qin Guang, who was flying in the air, he had originally planned to fly a little higher and use the ultimate move of condor fighting called 10,000 Eagles Greeting. He wanted to give Yu Ting and his unlucky magic array a vicious blow. Unexpectedly, as he was flying, he suddenly felt his wings tighten. A terrifying force came from below and fiercely pulled him down. He felt as if his wings were being grabbed by a giant. This force was so overbearing that he couldn't resist at all. Qin Guang's upward momentum immediately came to a halt. He turned around and fell headfirst to the ground. The name of this magic array was very strange, but it was so powerful that it made people's hair stand on end. As he fell, he tried to control his body with all his might, but it was all in vain. He couldn't move at all. As for Yu Ting, he continued to fly in his direction. Behind him, lightning flashed and thunder roared. It looked like a fireworks display. He can't move. Yu Ting seemed to be talking to himself, but it also seemed like he was telling someone else. His face lit up with a relieved smile. Qin Guang finally understood. In fact, this guy didn't know what the special effect of the no doomless formation was. He just wanted to give it a try. It was just that he was unlucky enough to be the one to succeed. Forget it, I'll peck you to death. Although he couldn't move his wings, Qin Guang could still turn his head slightly. He extended his neck and aimed his beak at Yu Ting, who was rushing up from below. Unfortunately, Yu Ting wasn't stupid. Just as the two were about to make contact, he nimbly dodged Qin Guang's kiss of death. He turned and followed the giant body of the blood pigeon as he fell. Then, as he descended, he stabbed the lightning spear in his hand at the blood pigeon's huge back. Now that he had used up all his reward points, the only thing he could rely on was his divine power. Sparks flew from the blood pigeon's back. Its crimson feathers were burnt black for a moment, then returned to normal the next moment. Yu Ting couldn't help but curse inwardly. The magical beast in the last checkpoint was a little too powerful. He had already used all his strength, but he still couldn't break through its defense. As for the other players, they didn't stay idle either. Seeing that the giant creature was really controlled as Yu Ting said, they all used their trump cards and bombarded the stomach of the blood pigeon. With a loud bang, the blood pigeon's huge body fell to the ground, and then there was no sign of life. Of course, Qin Guang wouldn't die so easily. In fact, while falling from the sky, he seemed to have suffered serious injuries, but in fact they were only superficial wounds. He didn't move now because he was trying to figure out how to use the unlucky no doomless formation. Without batting an eyelid, he tried to kick his legs. The feeling of being completely restrained was gone. He could move freely again. As he had guessed, the no doomless formation was actually a magic formation that restricted the flight of birds. Once it landed on the ground, it would lose its effect. Dead. On the ground, a Protoss looked at Yu Ting and asked carefully. Yu Ting squinted and waved his hand. Everyone stay where you are. Otherwise, the formation's effect will be weakened. I'll go take a look. The effect of the no doomless formation was better than expected. Of course, the players wouldn't give up so easily. Moreover, since Yu Ting had taken the initiative to test the waters, the others were more than happy to see him. If the pigeon was faking it, they wouldn't be the ones to suffer. Yu Ting was on high alert. He approached the blood pigeon step by step. On the other side, Wethany once again summoned a swamp, spreading it along the ground in an attempt to suck the body of the blood pigeon into the swamp. Yu Ting moved closer, raised his lightning spear and stabbed it at the blood pigeon's head. With a swish, the spear cut through the blood pigeon's feathers. Although it didn't pierce through, it finally left a wound on its head. Yu Ting's eyebrows twitched slightly. It seemed that the formation he had exchanged for was really effective. He just didn't know if this kind of binding contribution could be counted into the final kill contribution. Yu Ting gradually became selfish. Like Qin Guang, he believed that there must be a reason why the massacre mission divided the gamers into the Mortals and Protoss factions. In addition, throughout the entire process of carrying out the mission, it seemed that Slaughter World had always emphasized one point, and that was either the damage contribution or the number of people killed. The distribution of rewards seemed to be specific to each gamer, but Yu Ting felt that there was another meaning. Yu Ting's lips trembled slightly, and the mana formation on the ground started to change slightly. The blue light on the magic veined patterns grew brighter and brighter, and gradually, everyone couldn't see the scene in front of them clearly. Yu Ting said loudly, "Don't panic, I'm strengthening the control of the mana formation. Once it's under control, it'll be ours to slaughter. Don't be stingy with your reward points. Completing the mission and surviving is more important than anything else." "Are we really that generous?" In the human camp, the female elf archer asked Peasant, who was standing not far from her. Peasant looked at the motionless blood pigeon in the distance and frowned. She thought for a while and said, "Besides Emperor Yu Ting, none of us can afford the mana formation. Since we have a chance to kill this boss, we should work together with them." The female elf archer nodded and said, "Indeed. Mr. Dang said that to overcome this crisis, we have to work together with the annoying Protoss. But don't be too generous. We have to have a backup plan." "All right, don't worry, Sister Peasant. I understand." Peasant had the same thought and the others had similar thoughts. Though they didn't know what happened to Dang Dang, even if he was gone, they wouldn't forget his instructions. The situation between the Protoss and the humans had reversed. The humans were getting stronger while there were less than 10 Protoss left. Everyone didn't fear the Protoss, so they didn't oppose working with them. It was like a rabbit being unwilling to work with a jackal. If the jackal became a piglet of the same size as the rabbit, there would be room for negotiation. Everyone had seen the world without pigeons formation in the reward point shop. The price was a few 100,000 points. Yu Ting wasn't bragging. He had spent all his reward points. Qin Guang, who was pretending to be dead on the ground, was in awe. He felt sorry for Yu Ting's misfortune and angry at Yu Ting's incompetence. Previously, when he wanted to ask these people to help save the divine race, they all resisted and objected in various ways. Yu Ting had selfish motives, but they let go of their grudges and worked with him. Should I really treat them as my own kind? Qin Guang asked himself. He wasn't in a hurry to act as he knew Yu Ting's plan. Sure enough, in the blink of an eye, the halo around his body became more and more intense, as if it had really formed a large net to trap him. As for the players of the two factions, they couldn't see anything. The strong light was even worse than the white fog. The ordinary players started to panic and Yu Ting once again reassured them. "I've got Blood Pigeon under control. I'll be able to focus the mana formation on him soon." The others couldn't see clearly, but Qin Guang wasn't in human form. He had transformed into a big boss bird. His eyes were completely different from a human's. Qin Guang narrowed his eyes. He watched as Yu Ting moved the Protoss closer to him with the mana formation. He could see through Blood Pigeon's intentions. First of all, this guy thought he was being controlled. Second, he planned to send all the Protoss over to steal the old man's head? Good. Without batting an eyelid, he began to inhale violently. Fortunately, he was lying on the ground with his back facing up. Under the cover of the strong light, even Yu Ting, who could see, didn't notice that Blood Pigeon's chest was expanding. Finally, about 3 minutes later, all the Protoss were silently teleported to a place not far from Shuang. Qin Guang could even hear Yu Ting whispering instructions to the others in God's language. They were formulating a battle plan to succeed in one fell swoop. At the same time, Vesni's swamp once again covered his body. This time more than half of it was buried in the swamp. Holding his breath, Qin Guang felt as if the aura in his chest was on the verge of exploding. He was both the prey and the hunter. Chapter 1198. Yu Ting led the celestial race to probe carefully. Qin Guang was also trying to suppress his urge. A little closer, He squinted his eyes and allowed the wounds that Yu Ting had left on his body to gush out blood. He could have used the blood pigeon's talent to convert the blood that gushed out of the wounds into energy and reabsorbed it into his own body, but he did not do so. As a black-bellied young man of the new era, he wasn't one of those idiotic bosses in the game who only knew how to deal with players in a fixed way. He was strong, cunning, and good at acting. If the person controlling the world without pigeons formation was not Yu Ting, but another human player, they would not have fallen for it so easily. After all, humans were more careful in their actions and they were also more knowledgeable about such things. However, Yu Ting did not think too much about it. He believed in his own divine power and the game's setting that was forced upon him. In his mind, this was a quest space created by the origin will of the endless realm of gods. This quest space must be perfect and flawless. When Yu Ting chose to purchase the magic circle, he had carefully read the description of the magic circle. It was clearly written that the magic circle could cause fatal damage to bird-type creatures and completely control them. Up until now, the effects of the magic circle had achieved its goal. Although it was expensive and consumed a lot of energy, as long as they could kill the blood pigeon, it was all worth it. As long as they could successfully complete this quest space, it would mean that their goal of leading the advance party into the game space had been achieved. Yu Ting turned to face the blood pigeon again and raised his hand. However, he immediately realized that no one could see his hand gesture, so he retracted it. Even as the controller of the magic circle, he could only see a faint shadow. However, he could sense that the entire magic circle's power was pressing down on the blood pigeon. Heavy breathing could be heard from the blood pigeon's direction. Yu Ting felt that the most powerful phantom beast was struggling with all its might. Everyone, pay attention to my instructions. Although this phantom beast is strong, the defense of its neck and the back of its head is relatively weak. When I give the order, everyone will attack together and attack the back of its head. We will definitely be able to deal a heavy blow. Yu Ting lowered his voice and spoke in a voice that only the Protoss could hear. Although we may have to bear a certain amount of risk, if we can deal a heavy blow to the blood pigeon, it will definitely give us an advantage in the mission settlement. However, don't be greedy. Just hit it once and then immediately retreat. Let this phantom beast find trouble with those mortals. Yu Ting felt that his plan was flawless. Even if he couldn't succeed in one fell swoop, he could at least deal a heavy blow to the blood pigeon. If the Protoss were to retreat immediately, the human race would have to stand in the front instead of the back. Facing the attack of the blood pigeons, they had no choice but to change their stance of not contributing. Unfortunately, in order to get his voice through, Yu Ting could switch channels, but he couldn't block messages. Every word he said was clearly heard by Qin Guang, who was pretending to be dead on the ground. Since this little scheme of his was within Qin Guang's calculations from the very beginning, it was destined to fail. The mortals who were completely in the dark were unwilling to follow Yu Ting's orders. However, the magic circle that Yu Ting had exchanged for had a miraculous effect. Even if they felt that something was amiss, the mortal players still held the intention to wait and see. If it was really as Yu Ting said, that they could completely control the blood pigeon until it died, that would be for the best. Even if there were any problems, Yu Ting should be the first to get into trouble. Aren't we being too passive? The fat household appliance worker asked softly into the walkie-talkie hanging around his neck. The genius high school student replied, "So what if we're being passive? Can you afford to buy a magic circle? But this won't end here. This is the last boss. These Protoss have never played online games before, so they don't know that even the real big boss is not easy to deal with, let alone the final boss. According to my experience, this blood pigeon must have many forms. Don't forget, when it exploded its feathers, the Protoss suffered heavy losses. We didn't feel good either. Isn't this situation similar to before?" The fat household appliance worker thought about it and nodded. It was exactly as the high school student had said. Just as the two of them were conversing, Yu Ting, who was in front of them, shouted. In the next instant, the azure light that had covered the entire beast fighting coliseum quickly converged on Blood Pigeon, who was lying on the ground. Yu Ting activated the full power of the No Pigeon formation. The blood pigeon turned into a blue lump. It was as if it had been pressed to the ground, unable to move. Nearly 10 Protoss who were prepared shot into the sky at almost the same time. Perhaps they were using all of their divine power, or perhaps they were carrying expensive single-use items that they had just exchanged for. The power of these items might not be worth mentioning in front of their celestial bodies, but in this slaughtering world, they were definitely the strongest attacks they had seen so far. Just from the names of the items that they had exchanged for, they knew that they were not joking. Annihilation cannons, star destroyers, slaughter puppets. In short, the names of these items were extremely domineering. If they were in the celestial realm, the gods might have thought that these items were so childish that they were laughable. But now they no longer looked down on them. 70% of their companions' projections had died. Perhaps they would be next. Although he was a noble Protoss in this mysterious mission space, other than having a slightly higher starting point at the very beginning, it seemed that his vitality was not much stronger than that of mortals. Therefore, they had to seize this hard-won opportunity and establish a real advantage for the advance party in the first test of this mysterious mission. With this thought in mind, all of the gods' attacks were aimed at the back of the blood pigeon's neck. On the other side, Yu Ting did not move. He only stared at the blood pigeon that was completely covered in blue light. Firstly, he really did not have any more reward points. Secondly, he had to control the magic formation. Finally, it was done. Seeing that everyone's attacks were aimed at the back of the blood pigeon's neck, Yu Ting thought to himself. At this moment, the huge body glowing with blue light suddenly raised its head. Yu Ting's pupils shrank. He opened his mouth wanting to shout out loud. But it was too late. The gigantic blood pigeon displayed unimaginable agility. When it raised its neck, it spread its wings and flapped them on the ground. Even though it had hit the swamp that Vithany had conjured, the large area of contact still provided it with enough strength to land a hit. The next moment, the blood pigeon stood upright and aimed its beak at one of the Protoss in front of it. Seeing that the situation was not good, the gods wanted to turn around and retreat, but it was too late. The blood pigeon spat out a silent shockwave from its beak, instantly enveloping the Protoss in front of it. Looking from the side, Yu Ting could clearly see the distortion in space caused by the shockwave. Deep down, Qin Guang was also shocked. He did not expect the power of the blood pigeon's toad spit from the condor fighting art to be so shocking. "I'll kill you with a mouthful of salt soda." He still had enough air in his chest. Qin Guang decisively shook his head. And so, under Yu Ting's desperate gaze, the toad spit swung in a full circle, sweeping through the 7 or 8 Protoss that were flying high and low in the air. But they did not cry out and fly backwards. Instead, they suddenly stopped in the air. Seeing the blood pigeon turn its head to face him again, the blue light that had enveloped its body gradually dissipated. Yu Ting did not look back and turned to run, dragging Vesthini along with him. If not for the fact that he could not say it, Qin Guang really wanted to tell him. "Are you stupid? Do you think you're invincible just because you added a magic seal that works against birds? Can't I just stay in the air? What's the point? No one said that birds had to fly, right? Could the magic seal stop ostriches?" But Qin Guang was not at ease. After Yu Ting took Vesthini away, the swamp was quickly solidifying, but the fatal attacks from the gods all fell on the ground in front of him. Yes, it was the place where he had swung his head. On the other hand, the ordinary players who were confused by the sudden turn of events had no idea what was going on. The ordinary players looked at the gradually dissipating magic seal and wanted to ask Yu Ting, but Yu Ting did not have time to deal with them. At the same time as the explosion in front of Qin Guang sounded like a nuclear bomb, the gods that had been frozen in the air after being hit by the toad spit suddenly turned into dust and scattered. Dead? They're all dead? The ordinary players were at a loss. The explosion in front of Qin Guang continued. He had no choice but to roll up his wings and protect himself. A strong explosion came from in front of him, and the blood pigeon's huge body was blown away. But before he could fly more than 2 meters, he fell to the ground as if he had been swatted by a fly swatter. The blue light that had been gradually dispersing actually condensed on his body again. Qin Guang's wings, which had just regrown with great difficulty, were first blasted bare by the explosions before the gods' deaths. What was even more tragic was that he was smacked by the magic array's anti-flying effect, causing him to be in a daze. Qin Guang raised his head slightly, wanting to curse. "I didn't fly on my own. Is it my fault that I was blown away?" Just then, a figure appeared not far away from him like lightning. It was the card magician. He was holding a metal card that was 1/2 meter long in his hand. It was a king card. Then his eyes flashed fiercely. He swung his body like a discus, and the big ghost in his hand spun and flew towards the blood pigeon's neck. This guy reacted quickly. He actually knew how to snatch the sword. Qin Guang raised his bare wings in front of his neck, a question the size of a fist in his head. To kill or not to kill? Chapter 1199. While he was thinking about this in his mind, the big ace had already sharply cut its wings. The card magician's seemingly inconspicuous move contained perhaps his strongest attack. Without the cover of feathers, the card cut a wound so deep that the bone could be seen. That wasn't the end of it. The metal ace didn't stay in his wings. Instead, it flew out and spun in the air for a while before exploding and turning into small poker cards that filled the sky. Then they flew in a big circle and returned to the card magician's hand. The magician shuffled the thick stack of cards in his hand as he retreated. Then he clapped his hands and the stack of cards turned into the big ghost that was 1/2 meter long. At the same time he shouted, "Everyone, don't just stand there. This big pigeon is seriously injured. Let's kill it while it's still weak." As he shouted, he threw the big ghost in his hand again. Qin Guang's heart ached. That's right, he felt heartache. "My heart is like the moon, but the moon shines on the ditch. I hit you hard." The old man was in such a good state that he could eat 3,000 kilograms of pigeon feed. "I'm too into it. I just can't bear to kill you, but you're forcing me to do this." He wanted to chase after Yu Ting and Wethany, but on the other side, many ordinary players were convinced by the card magician's bewitching words, and surrounded him. No matter what, Qin Guang's appearance as the real blood pigeon was a little unsightly. The feathers on the front half of his body had almost all been burnt, and his standard pigeon skin was densely covered in countless wounds. Coupled with the miserable state he had been in when he suddenly fell to the ground, anyone would think that he was an arrow at the end of its flight. In addition, Yu Ting's previous action of commanding the Protoss to steal the damage contribution points caused the ordinary players to misunderstand. They really thought that the blood pigeon was about to die. Although the sudden death of more than half of the Protoss shocked everyone, wasn't this because of the blood pigeon's final struggle? In any case, they had to be enemies with it. Rather than waiting for it to catch its breath and defeat it one by one, they might as well kill it now. Therefore, after a short period of silence, the players suddenly went berserk. Dressed in miniature Gundam armor, the old man's squad shone brightly as they put on their armor and charged toward Qin Guang's direction. While they were sprinting, 2 thick black tubes extended from their shoulders and shot at the blood pigeons in front of them. Countless light spots the size of ostrich eggs flew toward the blood pigeons. They did not plan to give Qin Guang any chance to breathe. The fatty and the middle school student hesitated for a moment and did not follow up immediately. This was the middle school student's idea. He had a feeling that things were not as simple as they seemed. The pigeon did not seem to be in a good situation, but its aura did not diminish much. Peasant and her 2 companions didn't move. They left the mana formation and gathered together. "Why don't we go and help? If we can kill blood pigeon along the way, won't everything be over?" the elven archer asked in confusion. Peasant shook his head and said, "No, let's observe the situation. I feel that the gaze of the magical beast is familiar." Peasant didn't want to tell the others his conjecture because it was too unbelievable. As the saying went, the eyes were the windows to the soul. A person's appearance and clothing could be disguised, but it was difficult to change one's gaze. The situation had changed drastically, so Peasant didn't think of a possibility. As time passed, especially when the blood pigeon's eyes flashed with anger and humiliation, Peasant recalled the Chinese characters that blood pigeon had written on the ground with its claws. Peasant suddenly felt that the pigeon's gaze was similar to Mr. Dang's. Though they were of different races and it was inconceivable she had an illusion. Peasant felt that the person who gave her the illusion was another person. She felt that the blood pigeon's gaze and behavior were similar to an outsider. When that person's figure appeared in her mind, she realized that Mr. Dang was similar to that person too. With that person as a bridge, Peasant slowly connected blood pigeon and Mr. Dang together. Using her analytical mind, Peasant overlapped Mr. Dang's face and gaze with the head of blood pigeon, who was about to retaliate. The more she thought, the more suspicious she felt, but she had no evidence. He was perplexed. If Mr. Dang was the final boss of the world of bloodshed, what would happen to them? He was almost invincible and had the intelligence of a human. He was an old gamer who had seen through the entire game system. What else could they do but wait for death? At a distance, Blood Pigeon sent the card magician's trump card flying. Then he used his wings to protect himself from the cannon fire of the old geezer's team. Behind it, the magical beast skill trio finally pounced on it. The warrior activated Bloodlust, the fireball magician cast Pyroblast, and the beastmaster summoned his shadow wolf. With a command, the shadow wolf transformed into a stream of light and charged forward. Qin Guang couldn't take it anymore. He understood that since they were on different sides, he would be cruel to himself if he was merciful to others. If he didn't make any changes now, he might really die here if he was worn out from exhaustion. Compared to normal gamers, he didn't have any reward points to use. All his actions had consumed his own energy. Now, compared to the beginning, his mobility had actually declined slightly. So, lad, I'm sorry. Qin Guang shook his head and used his claws to support himself on the ground. Then he strode forward. The card magician was caught off guard. He wanted to escape, but it was too late. When he was above the card magician's head, Qin Guang kicked up. In the blink of an eye, the azure light that had dissipated long ago returned to his body, and he smashed down like a cannonball, slamming into the ground. Qin Guang expressed that his experiment was a success. Unfortunately, the no pigeon under heaven array still hadn't exhausted its energy. The principle behind it was also simple. He had to maintain a certain part of his body in contact with the ground, or it would trigger the flight restriction. This brought him a lot of inconvenience, but it also had its benefits. Propping himself up from the ground, Qin Guang shook his head again and ran to another person who was very close to him. Everyone retreat. The boss has entered a chaotic attack state. The electrical appliance fatty shouted with a loudspeaker. Qin Guang ignored him. In order to make himself more ruthless, Qin Guang completely hypnotized himself to forget his human identity. He really turned himself into a phantom boss in a killing mission. For a moment he was full of murderous intent and pursued efficiency. He only wanted to reduce the enemy's life force as quickly as possible. He killed the shadow wolf in front of him with a casual claw. His second choice was the magical beast warrior closest to him. The magical beast warrior used a cover skill and dashed to his teammates at the speed of charge. But the blood pigeon suddenly opened its beak, and a sound wave came from behind, messing up the warrior's escape route. He couldn't control himself and turned back to the blood pigeon. Only when he was close to the blood pigeon did he barely regain control of his body and try to raise his shield. The blood pigeon lowered its head and pecked down like a chick pecking at rice. The giant beak rammed into the spiked rampart of Azeroth. There was a loud noise. The beak flashed red and the door-sized steel shield cracked. The magical beast warrior screamed, his eyes wide with anger. The beak pierced through his chest and his body gradually turned into dust. Another player died. At that moment, Qin Guang did not notice that the god's divine power that he had filtered and then dispersed from his but had quietly gathered together again. Yu Ting, who had escaped far away, had a fierce glint in his eyes. He made a difficult decision. In the depths of Yu Ting's mind, the unwilling cries of nearly 50 Protoss players rang out. Lord Yu Ting. No. Yu Ting, are you crazy? What are you doing? King. I won't let you go when we return to the divine realm. It turned out that the seemingly dead Protoss still had their divine souls in this mission space, even though their projected bodies had collapsed. Once the mission was over, these divine souls would return to their real bodies. But now Yu Ting was using the power given to him by the origin of the divine realm to control the scattered divine souls of the Protoss, and then gather all of their divine power together. His goal was simple. He would gather the divine power of the gods together and then detonate it. Under normal circumstances, Qin Guang would definitely be able to detect Yu Ting's sneaky trick. But right now, in order to kill the human players without any qualms, he had hypnotized himself a little too much. After pecking the warrior to death, Qin Guang pounced on the magician. The magician first used flash and teleported, but Qin Guang chased after him. The magician's flash skill was still on cooldown. Helplessly, he raised his hands high and with his position as the center, his body was instantly frozen by a glowing layer of ice. This was the ice block that mages used to protect themselves in World of Warcraft. It could temporarily enter a state of invincibility. But this was meaningless. Facing this ice block, Qin Guang first took a deep breath and then continued to breathe at it. Once the ice block skill's duration was up, it would naturally dissipate, and the magician would immediately turn into dust. Qin Guang's eyes were bloodshot. He turned around and pounced on one of the Gundams from Oldman's team. This mini Gundams that had transformed into a motorcycle turned around and tried to run, but a long feather suddenly flew over and stuck its tire, nailing it to the ground. Qin Guang rushed over and when he got close the mini Gundam suddenly opened up, and a panic-looking brawny man jumped out of it. As he ran, another long feather flew out, but it hit the force field shield activated by the battle robe on the muscular man's body. The long feather shattered, but it didn't vanish. Instead, it transformed into crimson blood that coiled tightly around the force field shield. The blood pigeon screeched, lifted its leg and stomped down viciously. The force field shield cracked. Death. This creature is going berserk. The fat electrical appliance specialist said in a panic. The genius high school student's heart raced. This creature is too powerful. We're no match for it. Sister Peasant, we can't hesitate anymore. Otherwise, everyone will die. Peasant's companions urged anxiously. Peasant pursed her lips tightly. At this moment, only she could see the indignation and pain in the mythical beast's eyes. Peasant wasn't wrong. At this moment, Qin Guang had already completed his self-hypnosis. However, his true self was still awake and independent in the depths of his heart. He discovered that as he truly began to slaughter the human race, his standpoint and position in the depths of his heart were inevitably shifting. All along, no matter how high his status was, or how he had the power to decide the life and death of the commoners, he didn't change his attitude. At the very most, he only regarded himself as a powerful and wealthy mortal. But now, there was an uncontrollable feeling in his heart. Perhaps he was wrong from the start. He wasn't a creature of the same level as the humans. He was like a child who was fed by wolves and had to return to human society sooner or later. In the process of killing, he awakened the instincts of a high-level creature that viewed life as grass and mortals as ants. Would he become like Yu Ting and the other Protoss? What could he do? Stop killing and wait for death with his eyes closed? Accept the consequences of failing the mission with a ridiculous reason and then be killed by the heavenly Holy Grail? So, the fundamental purpose of this world of slaughter is to let me completely break away from the state of mind of a mortal? Did he have to pay such a heavy price to upgrade the heavenly Holy Grail from the second level of One-Line Sky to the third level of Cloud Elephant Sky? Qin Guang couldn't help but recall bits and pieces of his memories. He remembered his parents' voices and smiles. He remembered his childhood friends and buddies from his hometown. He remembered his classmates who fought with him in junior high school. He remembered his best buddies in Gokyo University. His subordinates in Tianguang Group. The world that he was determined to change. And the women that he couldn't bear to part with. What should he do? He had never faced such a dilemma. Either he would die, or from now on he would no longer be himself. As he watched his body pounce towards another miniature Gundam, he used his completely calm self to think that perhaps this was the true meaning of the slaughtering world. Chapter 1200. Just as his mind was in chaos, a formless and terrifying force quietly approached his huge body. It was the power of the god race that Yu Ting had gathered again. But Yu Ting was not in a hurry to detonate it. Instead, he let the power that was mixed with his divine power and soul stick closely to the back of the blood pigeon, and then continuously seeped in like water. As for Qin Guang, even though his mind had long been tortured by the dilemma, his body continued to chase and kill the players around him with the instinct of the blood pigeon's phantom beast. It was said that after an actor got into character, there might be a situation where he couldn't get out of character. In the past, this kind of thing would never happen to Qin Guang, who was the world's best actor. But this time he found himself in an extremely awkward situation. His mind was extremely clear, but he couldn't control his body at all. The blood pigeon's huge body might be acting according to the instinct of a real phantom beast, or it might be driven by the second personality that he had used his acting skills to hypnotize himself. What made him feel the most helpless was that he was extremely calm and clearly watching everything that was happening, but he couldn't stop it. In other words, he didn't know what choice he should make at this time. Should he go against the self-restraint that he had all along and choose to walk the path of becoming a god? Or should he forcefully take back the control of his body, let these mortals go and then accept the outcome of the mission failure so that he, the master of the Holy Grail, could personally feel the mystery of the so-called reset? Perhaps self-sacrifice could make him look great, but he was unwilling. Besides, there were too many changes in the mission of the realm and cup this time, so he couldn't help but worry about everything in the outside world. Perhaps the real world had completely invaded? Then his reality might no longer be the reality of the past? As the initiator of everything, as the only person in the world and perhaps the entire universe who knew the truth of the heavenly Holy Grail, and as the only person who could control the power of the Holy Grail, if he died easily, what kind of change would it bring? Would it be the end of the world, the end of the universe? Qin Guang asked himself, sometimes I'm great but sometimes I might be selfish. If he really lost everything, even if the earth was destroyed, he couldn't do anything about it. But he always wanted to protect the people that he really cared about. If he were to die in the world in the cup now, then the countless dreams he had made in the past would all be for naught. Parents, friends and relatives, and everyone who was related to him or not, might turn into nothingness in this completely changed world, becoming something that had never existed in the first place. So what am I supposed to do? It seemed that he could only allow himself to transform from a human into an even more great god? As Qin Guang was thinking about this, he suddenly felt an itch on his back. He wanted to scratch, but he had no hands, only a pair of stiff wings. Then a soundless vibration suddenly came from his back. However, this vibration did not originate from a single point. Instead, it originated from the entire back of his blood pigeon body, moving forward and penetrating bit by bit. The terrifying impact came so suddenly and silently, but it was unstoppable. After the numbness and itchiness, there was an intense burning sensation. Blood Pigeon raised its head slightly and looked back, but there were no fireworks or smoke. But the strong impact did not stop for a moment, and the intense pain spread from Blood Pigeon body to Qin Guang's ego. He had a feeling that he might have been splashed with acid. Then he tried to turn his body, rubbing his huge back against the sand of the Colosseum, but it was useless. The seemingly never-ending impact continued to spread along Blood Pigeon's skin bit by bit at the molecular level, just like 10,000 nuclear-powered icebreakers working on the Antarctic continent. In the distance, Yu Ting gritted his teeth. His mind was filled with the resentful curses of the rest of the god race. But Yu Ting turned a deaf ear to them. He had already ignited the divine fire of the remaining god souls, and completely detonated the divine power. Apart from this method, he could not think of another way to kill Blood Pigeon. Shut up, you idiots. Don't forget, this is an order passed down by the will of the origin. Completely losing this divine soul but completing the mission is not a loss. The will of the origin will not mistreat any deity who has contributed to the endless divine realm. Vithani, who was beside Yu Ting, tried to defend him. However, this was meaningless. At the very least, in this mission space, Yu Ting had used his authority as the leader of the advance party to ignite the power of the other Protoss. No matter how indignant and resentful the other Protoss were, the process was irreversible. Qin Guang had to stop himself from pouncing on Fat Man and the genius student. He flipped on the ground again in an attempt to extinguish the fire on his back. But it was all in vain. The excruciating pain penetrated through Xueji's skin and continued to spread to his muscles and bones. In the eyes of the onlookers, the arrogant Blood Pigeon suddenly fell to the ground and struggled as though he was in excruciating pain. After a short moment of hesitation and panic, the remaining gamers, led by the hale and hearty elder, made a decision. Fight. Mr. Dang was right. If the celestial gamers perished, the mortals would be next. Against Blood Pigeon, who had entered the third stage without Mr. Dang, the strongest MT and the strongest damage dealer, the mortals had no hope. Let's do it, Sister Peasant. Otherwise we'll miss our last chance. The female elf archer who was beside Peasant said. Peasant gritted her teeth and said, Wait a moment, I think Blood Pigeon is Mr. Dang. She finally voiced her conjecture. How is that possible? The other girl found it hard to believe. Peasant said, In Mission 8 Mr. Dang didn't complete the mission, but he didn't die. I suspect he triggered a special event and became a boss. Didn't Blood Pigeon write on the ground? That's a trap. The mythical beast boss is trying to make us lower our guard. No matter what, he has started killing the human gamers and we have no choice. Even if he's Mr. Dang, what's the use? We are on opposing sides. If we don't kill him, we will die. The other girl said agitatedly. Facing Blood Pigeon, who was suddenly injured, everyone knew that this might be their last chance. Peasant trembled. She knew that her companion was right. Make a decision. We don't have time to hesitate, the elf archer said. The elven archer said again. Finally, Peasant nodded and gritted his teeth as he said, All right, all right. In the blink of an eye, the elf archer aimed at the Blood Pigeon. Peasant held the hourglass in his right hand and placed his left hand on his longbow. On the other side, the fat household appliance man and the middle school student, who had been running away in panic, turned around. They put on their equipment again and charged at the struggling Blood Pigeon with no regard for their lives. Although their equipment looked comical, their power was quite extraordinary. The production line robot that the fat man was sitting on was more than 10 meters tall. It could produce the metal waste at an average speed of 1 microwave oven every 5 seconds, and then use the high-speed conveyor belt on its shoulder to throw it out, just like a battering ram in a movie. As for the young prodigy, although he was wearing a strange armor, he did not fully utilize the awakened ability of the fat household appliance. Instead, he strangely tossed out grayish-black energy balls from the cockpit from time to time. The balls wobbled as they floated towards Blood Pigeon's head. Then they would hit Blood Pigeon's body like water bubbles, but there was nothing strange about it. The greatest threat to Qin Guang was the elf archer's magic arrows, which were enhanced by Peasant's Time effect. Every arrow hit the vital parts of the Blood Pigeon's body. It was either the eyes, the neck, or the slightly opened beak of the Blood Pigeon. It was commonly referred to as the deep throat. Qin Guang, who had been in the Jianghu for tens of thousands of years, had never been in such dire straits. This sort of feeling was perhaps even more painful than the feeling of true death in the Sea of Momentary. At the very least, he would be able to die once and for all, and he would also know how many times he could revive after he died. It was a little painful, but he wasn't worried. Now he was worried because he didn't know if he could revive. In addition, he felt terrible in his heart as well. On one hand, he was questioning himself. On the other hand, he was suffering from the corrosive poison that was destroying his body. On the other hand, the human that he wanted to protect was trying to kill him. At this moment, his spirit was gradually shaken. His original self, which had left his physical body, was slowly returning to his physical body and was showing signs of reuniting with Blood Pigeon's consciousness, which was controlling his physical body. But he couldn't do that. If his consciousness were to reunite with his physical body, what awaited him would probably be rage to the point where he would completely lose his rationality. He finally found out why his consciousness was detached from his body. It was the after effect of using the meditation technique in the labyrinth of chaos. The after effect was about to dissipate because of his emotions. The elf archer's magic arrow pierced his throat and penetrated downwards. The arrow transformed into pure destructive energy that destroyed the Blood Pigeon's chest. Intense pain came again. The Blood Pigeon turned around angrily, flapped its wings and roared. But just as it was about to pounce, there was a loud noise behind it. Blood spurted out like a fountain. This time the Blood Pigeon's entire back was gone. Countless feathers scattered in all directions, along with shattered flesh, bones, and exploding blood. When the bystanders looked over, they only felt that this huge Blood Pigeon had turned into a huge flower of blood that had suddenly bloomed. This explosion sent the Blood Pigeon flying forward again. Her feet left the ground by accident, and she was immediately suppressed by the last remaining force of the magic array. The flower of blood was flattened as if it had been smashed by a spatula. The Blood Pigeon's huge body trembled, but it didn't move anymore. Is it dead? The fat man tried to throw a microwave at the pigeon, and even smashed it into its body, which was still gushing with blood. Qin Guang's second personality in the Blood Pigeon's body collapsed under the sudden burst of pain. His real self was being pulled by an unknown force, trying to get back into the Blood Pigeon's body. Even Qin Guang felt sad when he saw the Blood Pigeon's miserable condition. He tried to resist it. On the one hand, he tried to form a new consciousness in the Blood Pigeon's body, and on the other hand, he tried to use a method to calm his own consciousness. But it was all in vain. Although it was a mental method, it still needed the cooperation of the three aspects of essence, qi, and spirit. His bird body couldn't use complicated human martial arts at all, not to mention that he was seriously injured. While tearing at the Blood Pigeon's body, he resisted at the same time. The struggle of consciousness made his mind fall into another extremely mysterious realm. His soul was suddenly separated from the Blood Pigeon's body, and he could even look down at himself. He was still alive, but his soul had left his body. But the body that left his body was not his real body. Besides, he existed in this world of cups as a spiritual body. Even if he had a physical body, it should be a fake body created by the energy of the world of cups. No matter how real the feeling was, as the master of the Holy Grail, the experiencer of the world of cups, and the real sufferer of the test, he had a clear understanding of it. He knew in his heart that this body of his was fake. But now, even his fake body had been inexplicably stripped away. Qin Guang's mind stopped at the same place. Looking at the Blood Pigeon's miserable condition, He felt like he was flying freely in this world of cups after being separated from his body. He wanted to stay awake, but he couldn't control the strong feeling of separation and the endless expansion of the tentacles of his mind. Everything in the Colosseum seemed to be touched by the tentacles of his mind. Not only that, his consciousness kept spreading to the sky above his head. At this moment he felt like he had become one with the Colosseum of the slaughtering world, but at the same time his soul was being pulled into the blood pigeon's body. It was a painful torment, but it was also an unparalleled pleasure. He seemed to be gradually turning from a mortal to an omnipotent and omniscient god, but on the other hand he was a heavily injured pigeon struggling on the ground, unwilling to die. His illusory body was dying, but his real soul was expanding infinitely. The threads of his mind, like the tentacles of a jellyfish, spread upward over the 1-kilometer diameter Colosseum, and kept going up and up. With the mosaic audience in front of him, Qin Guang originally thought that the blue sky and white clouds above the Colosseum were just high-quality pictures. But when his mind really began to spread upward, he found something strange. There was no picture of the dome, and the sky might be real. But there was no limit to the upward extension of his mind, and his left and right were still trapped in the 1-kilometer diameter of the cylinder. His mind kept spreading upward at a speed that completely surpassed the speed of light, trying to touch the blue sky and white clouds. This was not his active behavior, but he couldn't control his mind at all, just like water that couldn't control itself from spreading in a sponge. The threads of his mind were different from the spiritual force, but the thoughts of his soul body seemed to be merging with the whole world in the cup. But this world in the cup was very strange. The surface space was only 1 kilometer, but the vertical space was endless. Suddenly there was a pop sound. Qin Guang's mind seemed to break through something. Then he saw a completely dumbfounded scene. He saw himself. Not the bald guy in the world in the cup, but the real him. The himself was holding the steering wheel with both hands, looking straight ahead with a pained expression. This was the himself, who was driving to the airport outside. Where the hell am I now? Qin Guang's mind slightly looked down, and saw the supreme holy grail on the cup holder of the car. Holy *T. It means my mind rushed out of the cup. What the hell is this situation? Looking at the himself in front of him, Qin Guang's mind was in a mess. Wait a minute, is this all of my consciousness or part of my consciousness that came out? Most of my thoughts are in the world in the cup, and the part of my thoughts that came out now. Wait, a person's thoughts should be a complete individual, so the current me should still be the complete me. But half of it is in the cup and the other half is outside looking at me ? Really? Qin Guang tried to call Lioli in his mind, but still no one paid attention to him. He looked outside the car again. The car that should be speeding on the highway at 120 kilometers per hour was completely still. He simply floated out of the car and looked around. In front of him was a world that had come to a complete standstill. The sun hung high in the sky, its light soft. The wheels that should have been spinning at high speed were completely still. The white smoke coming out of the exhaust pipe dragged a long line behind the car, and the further it went, the lighter it became. He could even see the flame in the internal combustion engine that was frozen. The leaf that flew over from the side of the highway quietly hung in the air, about 7 or 8 meters in front of his car. Qin Guang walked over and stretched out his finger to try to touch the leaf, but he touched nothing. Wait, I don't have fingers at all. Qin Guang suddenly realized that he was just an existence made up of thoughts. Compared to the rules of the outside universe, he should be something that didn't exist at all. Also, why is my thought no longer spreading? Maybe in the rules of the outside universe, the diffusion of my thought is suppressed. With a thought, Qin Guang flew up. He floated in the air and looked at the bird that was flying forward with its wings spread, but it was also completely still. Thinking about the flow of time in the outside world when he was in the world in the cup, he was sure of his guess. When he was in the cup, the flow of time in the outside world was indeed changed. Maybe it wasn't completely still, but at least it was slowed down countless times. This shouldn't be something that he could see and feel, but because of the mutation of the slaughter world this time, it was completely presented to him in such an incredible way. Now that I'm out, what's the situation in the cup? With a thought, his thought returned to the cup. He could still see the body of the blood pigeon lying on the ground, and the blood and flesh splattering in the air. The drops of bright red blood were also suspended in the air. The time in the world in the cup was also confused. His thought was in two different planes at the same time, so compared to his thought, the two worlds had become a static existence. Is this possible? After complaining, Qin Guang let out a long breath and inexplicably relaxed. The sense of urgency that had never weakened since entering the world of slaughter suddenly disappeared from his body. You may not believe it, but I feel like I pressed the pause button when fighting a boss. Since time has stopped, I can finally catch my breath and rest for a bit. He found that he really didn't need to worry. He had endless time to think about how to deal with the situation in front of him because the concept of time had disappeared. At this moment in the slaughter world, Peasant didn't know that the sand in the hourglass in her right hand was falling. Chapter 12:01. Since he was already outside, Qin Guang stayed next to the car for a few minutes. He had an idea. He simply flew straight out and headed in the direction of Lilai County. Strictly speaking, he couldn't be called flying. He could only be considered floating, but his speed wasn't slow. In ancient times, Fan Juqing committed suicide to meet Zhang Zhao. The ancients had a guess about the speed at which the soul drifted. It was about 1,000 miles a day. In the past, when Qin Guang read this story, he was stunned. He felt that the person named Fan Juqing died too casually and honestly, and he let down his family. As for the soul traveling 1,000 miles, he used to think that it was all nonsense. Now that this kind of thing happened to him, he had to believe it even if he didn't want to. As he floated, he thought. Although the ancients were very imaginative, they were still lacking. With my current flying speed, it's not just 1,000 miles a day. I can't even go as fast as 10,000 miles per hour. In his perception, only a few dozen seconds had passed at most, and he had already appeared in the sky above Lilai County with a whoosh. Of course, compared to the outside world and other people, perhaps not even a second had passed. Everything was still in a state of stillness. The first thing that came into Qin Guang's eyes was the Qin family's villa that had been blown up. When he received the notification, the explosion had already happened for about half an hour. Even now, thick smoke was still billowing and sparks were flying everywhere. Qin Guang went closer to check the situation first. It was really blown up and even the foundation was gone. Some time ago, when the house was being renovated, his mother would proudly take photos of the pretentious effect and send them to his WeChat. Now it was all gone. Qin Guang walked around in the frozen fire and came to the location of his bedroom according to the plan. He looked down. The various treasures he had collected when he was young were scattered all over the place in the raging flames, and had already been burned to ashes. The water margin cards that he collected when he ate crispy noodle snacks, Jigong comic books, slam dunk posters. In short, these things that he once loved were all gone, all gone. Although his parents took the whole family to hide in another place, it was impossible to take these things with them. No one would think that the assassin organization would be so crazy. Qin Guang looked around again and found a few pieces of metal fragments. Sure enough, the assassin organization had used a powerful weapon. Perhaps they were guarding against the basement in the villa, so they decided to give it a try. In that case, the murderer shouldn't be too far away. When they found that there was no one in the house, they wouldn't give up so easily. They would probably continue to stay in Lilai County to look for opportunities. With another thought, Qin Guang appeared at the hiding place of his parents. The two of them looked distressed. Based on Qin Guang's understanding of the two of them, his mother should be feeling heartache for the cross-stitch that she painstakingly embroidered, while his father should be feeling heartache for the 100-inch television that he bought to watch soccer. Forget it, it's fine as long as he's fine. After strolling around for a while, Qin Guang went out again. In his current state, it would not be difficult for him to uncover the assassins who were hiding among the ordinary people in Lilai County. He floated into the air, closed his eyes and carefully felt the emotions of the other people in the entire Lilai County area. Then something incredible happened. His thoughts, which had been compressed and fixed in the outside world, suddenly dispersed with a loud bang. It was as if he had entered the next realm. In the past, there was a point of view that to some extent, the human mind transcended time and space. A person could imagine that 10,000 years had passed in an instant in his mind, but only a moment had passed in the outside world. Assuming that the world in his mind really existed, then in the world he imagined a long time had really passed, and his mind had completely transcended the concept of time. This was a very subjective concept of idealism, and in the past, Qin Guang often ridiculed people who held such ideas as neurotics. But now his concept was subverted again. When the tentacles of his mind became infinitely active and could spread to every place in the whole world in an instant, He truly understood what it meant to transcend time and space. With a thought, his mind appeared directly in front of the Eiffel Tower in France. Then he slightly lowered his head, to look directly below him, and with another thought he could see the ground made of cement and steel retreating rapidly in front of him. He turned into an invisible earthworm that drilled down, and then appeared in a dark and cold basement. There were 17 or 18 people sitting in this basement, and in front of them was a row of monitors. The screen on the monitor was a bird's-eye view of Lilai County, and the Qin family's villa that had been blown up was even marked with a red dot. Qin Guang was shocked himself. Have I become God mode where everything I want comes true? I just wanted to find an assassin, but I actually went straight to the enemy's lair. So the question is, what should I do to kill these bastards? As Qin Guang thought about this in his mind, he tried to reach out and pat the guy's head in front of him, but without any suspense he hit nothing. He pondered for a while and came up with a sudden idea. He tried to gather his mental strength and his mind into a bundle, and then tried to probe the guy's head in front of him bit by bit. This specific method was a bit similar to many of the techniques that he had cultivated in the past that had the effect of mental shock, but in practice the method was more illusory. Everything was based on the existence of his current pure spirit body state. After a while he retracted his mental strength, and when he opened his eyes again, there was a double image of the person in front of him. This time when Qin Guang stretched out his hand again, he did not miss anything, and he actually grabbed something. He pulled hard, and the double image of the person in front of him was pulled out by him. With another chop of his hand, this seemingly real but not real double image was smashed by him. The person was dead. Even if his body was still alive, his spirit was dead. He used the same method on the other 10 people, and then with a thought Qin Guang's mind went back to Lilai County. He could not believe that after erasing the consciousness of more than 10 people, he did not feel the slightest bit of emotional fluctuation. This feeling was perhaps worse than accidentally stepping on a few ants while walking on the road. At least at that time he would look down at the struggling ants and feel a little sympathy in his heart. He suddenly became vigilant. Could it be that he was really gradually losing his humanity? But when he looked at his parents in front of him, a trace of warmth surged in his heart. No, I'm still that reliable young man of the new era. But what's going on? He became extremely conflicted in his heart. But no one could give him an answer. He was like a lonely prisoner locked in an empty cell, imprisoned for an instant but also for eternity. Even Lioli, who had always given him countless suggestions at critical moments, had completely cut off contact with him. Qin Guang quietly stayed at home, sitting beside his parents for a while. Then he got up and went out for a stroll. This time, all the killers lurking near Lilai County were cleared by him. When erasing the consciousness of these killers, he even deliberately slowed down and used his heart to feel the pain of their souls being torn apart. He thought that this would make his heart a little ripple. No, there was no emotion. This time it was not even comparable to pinching an ant to death. Ants were creatures after all. If there was an extreme animal protection organization, at least they could find a reason to criticize this person for being cold and heartless. He felt like a person cutting lettuce with a kitchen knife. Animal protection organizations did not protect lettuce. Qin Guang ran to Wu Tong's side in Wujing City. Sure enough, he also found a killer, but he did not have time to do it. This time when Qin Guang tore apart these people's souls, he felt like he was cutting lettuce with a pair of scissors. Well, at least they were organic. The Organic Protection Organization had something to say. He strolled to Yanjing and crushed the souls of the killers around Jinshuiwa. This time he felt even more faint, as if he had smashed a brick into two. Qin Guang thought to himself, it's over, it's really over this time. He could not let these people go, but the more he killed the less he felt. This should be a very sad thing, but why can't it cause any ripples in my heart? It's not right to say that I really have no feelings. My motive for doing this has never changed from the beginning. I want to protect the people I care about and then destroy the people I don't care about. So, it is a paradox to say that I have lost my humanity and am cold-blooded and heartless. As Qin Guang thought of this, he touched Jiang Yage's face and then immediately left. Unknowingly, it might have been a few days since he came out of the world of cups, but in a sense it might not even be a second. Qin Guang remembered exactly how many souls he had crushed, no more and no less, a total of 27,638 souls. All the killer organizations and individuals who were tempted by the $400 million bounty were not spared. Ever since his villa was blown up before he entered the world of killings, Qin Guang had never thought of sparing these people. At this moment he was in such a strange state, so it was even more impossible for him to be merciful. Suddenly, more than 27,000 people became crazy. Perhaps tomorrow it would shock the world. But it was also possible that nothing would change. In the face of the world's population of nearly 7 billion, more than 20,000 people were not a big number. Tens of millions of people died every year, more than 20,000 people went crazy at the same time, of which about 2,000 were in Lilai County, and the rest were scattered all over the world. Other than causing some diplomatic chaos in Lilai County, it did not seem to be a big deal. As Qin Guang thought about it, he suddenly felt something in his heart. It seemed that for every single individual, life was so precious that it could not be regained once it was lost. But once this individual's life was magnified to the entire race or the entire world, or even across the distance of time to the long river of history, even if an emperor were to die, it would not be a big deal. Perhaps some people would say that the change in the Black Tortoise Gate changed history. If Li Jianqing were to take over the throne according to the butterfly effect, then in front of us would be another world. Some people would say that if Qiu Jichu did not pass by Ox Village, but if time was stretched out from the birth of the first single-celled organism on Earth to the present billions of years ago, from the Jurassic period to the present, and then another billions of years later, when the sun's life came to an end, it would not matter how many emperors died. Then, if the entire universe's long history of tens of billions of years, even if the sun exploded, even if the Milky Way collided with the Andromeda Galaxy, so what? Therefore, killing more than 20,000 people was not a big deal. Qin Guang quietly looked at his mother in front of him and thought again. I should have long separated my vision from the realm of mortals. When the Holy Grail leveled up for the first time from seeing spirit sky to one-line sky, when my consciousness followed the power of the Holy Grail to the end of the universe for the first time, I should have understood this matter. When I don't need to care about something, then I am the master of the entire universe. I don't need to be responsible for a single individual. When I care about someone or something, then whether that person's mood is happy or not is the most important thing in the entire universe. Its importance is far greater than that of a planet filled with extraterrestrial life exploding in the infinitely distant starry sky. When this thought suddenly became clear, his whole body suddenly trembled. When he came back to his senses, he was already back in the slaughtering world. He was still trapped in Blood Pigeon's body, lying on the ground in pain and powerlessness. Not far away, there was an explosive magic arrow flickering with red light that was about to pierce his eyeball. His stomach was filled with many strange things. They were the robots that the household appliance Fatty had transformed into, continuously throwing things like rice cookers, microwave ovens, electric fans, and so on through a conveyor belt. The situation still looked extremely dangerous, but his heart was calm. Chapter 1202. One of the 3 biggest misconceptions in life was that he could kill his opponent. However, Qin Guang knew that he wasn't imagining things. The players who were imagining things were overflowing with joy, especially Yu Ting. He was no longer hiding in the corner, but instead he confidently walked towards Qin Guang. Wathani was sitting on his shoulder. The 2 remaining Protoss had finally found their true sense of existence. As for the human players, after Qin Guang went on a killing spree, there were less than 10 left. However, everyone's faces were brimming with joy. The final boss was finally going to rise to the heavens. Even the steadiest old man couldn't control his emotions. Although his actions were still very careful, he couldn't hide the joy in his eyes. Qin Guang didn't panic at all. The mysterious power that had been destroying his body seemed to have run out, and the burning sensation on his back had disappeared. Fine, I don't have my back anymore. Qin Guang lay on the ground, his stomach still stuffed things into Fatty's stomach. Damn it, if you didn't send in electrical appliances, I'm afraid I'd already be pregnant. I'll give you an air humidifier later, it'll scare you to death. Qin Guang wasn't in a hurry to get up and resist. He continued to lie on the ground, looking like he was on the verge of death. At the same time, he carefully examined the effects of the unlucky magic formation that Yu Ting had placed in the Colosseum. After some investigation, he felt a little relieved. The damned no-pigeon magic formation had disappeared. This meant, fine, I can't even stand up now, let alone fly. Then Qin Guang began to examine his injuries. He didn't know how many bones there were in the pigeon's body, so he didn't know how many bones he had broken. In any case, he was sure that most of them were broken. Most of his internal organs were damaged. Fortunately, his skull was hard enough, so his head hadn't been broken yet. The heart, which was about 1 or 2 people tall, was also full of scars with a large hole in it. This was the work of an elven archer. However, he had to thank the fat household appliance. No one would believe him if he told them that the old rice cooker thrown by the fat household appliance was stuck in the hole, blocking the blood that was supposed to spurt out. Everyone, it's time to send it off. Yu Ting walked up to the blood pigeon and stood about 5 to 6 meters away from its head. He looked relaxed, but in fact, every muscle in his body was tense. Qin Guang's sharp ears could even hear the dull sound of thunder from his abdomen. His divine power was ready to be unleashed. A rumbling sound came from behind him. When the fat man saw Yu Ting approach first, he finally dared to drive his robot closer. Is it about to end? Fatty's voice came from afar. He looked at Blood Pigeon's huge body on the ground and blinked a little. Without batting an eyelid, he turned his gaze to the middle school student who was driving the smaller robot beside him. The middle school student nodded slightly and the two understood. In the blink of an eye, the tall and short household appliance robots suddenly turned around and charged at each other. However, the two did not collide. The moment they were about to collide, the two huge robots suddenly emitted a strange light. It was very similar to the 3D scanning beam that the fat household appliance worker used to make the microwave. Then the two robots that had completely turned into balls of light melted like liquid and fused together. When the light dissipated, there was only an even bigger giant robot left. In the cockpit covered by the super strong glass cover, there was no sign of the fat household appliance worker. Only the middle school student was left. The cover on the robot's chest was opened and an empty combat suit fell out. Others might not understand what was going on, but Qin Guang, who was lying on the ground and pretending to be dead, saw it clearly. Even he was shocked. Wasn't this little wimp hiding his abilities a little too deeply? He even lied to himself. There was no fat person in the beginning. This fat person was his puppet. It wasn't just a toy puppet. The middle school student had even cut out a part of his soul and stuffed it into the fat puppet's body. He had even fooled Qin Guang and the Protoss. The giant robot that was recombined no longer looked like a funny household appliance. It looked full of mechanical beauty, but the joints were not simple mechanical combination. Instead, they were like human joints that had a biological structure. As a veteran anime fan, Qin Guang saw through this thing at first glance. What a scam. Isn't this the robot number 1 that Shinji drove in the EVA? Don't think that I won't recognize you just because you changed the paint from purple to white. Before Qin Guang could finish his sentence, the middle school student number 1 took out a giant gun that was about 50 feet long from its thigh. The black muzzle was aimed at Yu Ting's head. Get out of the way or I'll kill you. The middle school student's voice came from the chest of the robot number 1, with a strong electronic tone. That's right, you've obtained a lot of damage. Shouldn't you leave some for us? On the other side, the hale and hearty old man jumped out of his miniature Gundam. In his hand was a tang sword that was glowing with rainbow light. This was his true weapon. From the way he held the sword, Qin Guang could tell that the old man was an inner strength warrior. He was a master swordsman. However, the old man was different from his subordinates in the Guangding headquarters. He was a reclusive civilian expert. Besides being an inner strength warrior, he was also a high-ranking official. Who knows if there are any traps at the end of the mission? Will the mission be judged as a failure if the contribution points aren't up to standard? The elf archer beside peasant wielded her bow and walked forward. She said, "The explosion on the blood pigeon's back was caused by you, right? Shouldn't you at least give us some damage?" The other human players nodded in agreement. Based on the power of the previous explosion and the fact that the blood pigeon was on the verge of death, the explosion should have taken away at least 40% of the total damage. If they didn't get more contribution points, the boss's rewards would be given to Yu Ting and Wethany. Previously, the Celestials were powerful, so they were thankful that Yu Ting didn't lead the Celestials to massacre the mortals. Now there were only 2 Celestials left. They must have expended a lot of energy fighting the blood pigeon. It was time to shed all pretense of cordiality. In an instant, Yu Ting felt several forces lock onto his back at the same time. However, he showed no fear. Instead, he sneered and turned around to look at everyone. "What? Do you think I'm afraid of you? There's nothing to be afraid of. Just scram," the middle school student said calmly. The large pike in his hand started to emit a loud bang. In the blink of an eye, there was a loud bang. He suddenly pulled the trigger and an emerald green light shot out from the black muzzle, heading straight for Yu Ting. The light didn't hit Yu Ting. A ring of lightning appeared in front of Yu Ting. The light cannon of prototype number 1 shot into the ring, but it didn't penetrate the ring. Instead it disappeared mysteriously. Upon closer inspection, one could see that there were countless tiny electric arcs extending from the ring of thunder and lightning and connecting to the beam of light shot out by Machine 1. Apart from that, the ring of lightning was also spinning at a speed equivalent to the speed of light. Yu Ting had actually used such a move to absorb the beam cannon of robot number 1. I've said that you're just lowly mortals. Even if the Celestials are only me and Wethany, you can't afford to offend us, Yu Ting said. Yu Ting said. In the next instant he had already appeared in the void above Space Shuttle number 1, looking down at the huge fellow. He looked through the mask at the middle school student whose body was connected to nerves. How is this possible? The middle school student shouted in fear. Lad, you'll never understand what it means to control the power of lightning. Yu Ting calmly raised his hand. The sound of thunder in his palm was deafening. If one had to calculate the power of the thunder in his hand, it would be equivalent to the amount of thunder on Earth for an entire year. At that moment his body shook violently and his arm exploded. Only after his arm exploded did a pitch-black arrow fly out from his hand. This was the time acceleration magical arrow shot by Peasant and the archer. The lightning that Yu Ting had planned to strike plane number 1 exploded with a loud bang. The dazzling lightning scattered and then rained down on plane number 1. At the same time the old man and his 2 companions disappeared. When they reappeared they were already in front of plane number 1. The old man was carrying the middle school student who was emitting black smoke. His life was uncertain. Yu Ting didn't care about the old man and his companions. Instead he looked at Peasant and his 2 companions. Yu Ting felt that Peasant and his companions were the greatest threat to him. Peasant felt that the situation was not good. He wanted to escape with the other 2 companions, but he tripped and fell to the ground. The 3 of them looked down. Their feet were covered by 3 lumps of soft mud. Further away, Withany looked at the 3 of them with a smug expression. She opened her palms slightly and aimed in their direction. This was clearly her handiwork. In the blink of an eye Yu Ting was above the 3 of them. His expression was cold. Lightning flowed on his severed right hand and it was regrowing rapidly. He raised the lightning spear in his left hand and slashed at the 3 of them. He was going to slash them at the waist. At this moment the girl on Peasant's left pulled her leg out. Peasant turned the hourglass in his hand, and the sand inside fell to the ground. Yu Ting and the lightning around him suddenly stopped moving. On the other side the girl who hadn't done anything before didn't attack Yu Ting, who had been frozen in time, after she pulled her leg out from the ground. She punched at Qin Guang who was pretending to be dead on the ground tens of meters away. Just when Qin Guang was watching the show he suffered an undeserved calamity. He was punched in the butt by that girl. He couldn't call it buttocks. His blood pigeon's back was gone, including his buttocks. He cursed in his heart, "Are you crazy? Yu Ting is the one who wants to kill you. Why did you hit me?" That wasn't the end. After the girl punched the blood pigeon's buttocks she stirred the flesh. Qin Guang's mouth twitched. If he wasn't pretending to be dead he would have cursed the girl. "Wait, you're so far away. How did you punch me?" This thought flashed in Qin Guang's mind and his eyes widened. If he didn't remember wrongly this scene seemed familiar. Qin Guang glanced sideways and saw that the girl was standing still, but her fist was retreating from his buttocks. Rubber person? Bloody rubber person? While he was complaining the girl's fist had already retracted at an extremely fast speed. Then she swung her right arm and her blood-stained right fist shot towards Yu Ting like a cannonball. She shouted even louder, "Go to hell. Rubber doesn't conduct electricity." Qin Guang was stunned. Gosh, fortunately he didn't give up on Peasant and the girl beside her. According to the nature of the heavenly Holy Grail, if he wasn't wrong, this girl who had hidden herself quite well was most likely Sister Lu Fei. Wasn't this the ability of the rubber fruit? Her awakened ability was to transform into rubber. It was no wonder she didn't use it previously. As she shouted, her fist covered in Qin Guang's pigeon blood slammed into Yu Ting's chest. Chapter 1203. Yu Ting screamed in pain as he flew backward. Rubber Girl revealed a joyful expression and said, "It's just as I thought. Ordinary attacks will be dodged by his lightning-transformed body, but the pigeon blood has the effect of breaking magic, so he can't dodge." Qin Guang, who was pretending to be dead as he watched the 2 factions kill each other, cursed inwardly. It wasn't pigeon's blood that dispelled demons, it was dog's blood. Pigeon's blood was a great supplement. Yuting was severely injured. Vithany saw that the situation was dire and turned to flee. She and Yuting, who was vomiting blood, retreated far away. Lord Yuting, are you all right? Vithany asked anxiously. Yuting wiped the blood from his lips and shook his head. I'm fine. As they conversed, Vithany stuffed a bottle of healing potion into Yuting's hand. He had indeed sustained serious injuries. On the other side, the genius high school student woke up from his coma. When he opened his eyes, he saw himself in the arms of the old man. He struggled to free himself and turned his face to the side. After a long time he said, "Thank you." The old man smiled and patted his shoulder. "You're not as cold as you look." The high school student shrugged his shoulders. In this mission space we aren't our true selves. Many people have different personalities on the internet and in real life. This is the same. The old man smiled and said, "That's because you're still young and haven't seen through your life. Let's not talk about this now. We should do something more meaningful." The high school student looked at Yuting, who was recuperating in the distance. He then looked at the motionless blood pigeon on the ground. Peasant, rubber lady, and the elven archer walked over. At this moment, the remaining 7 human players finally let go of their grudges and united as one. The elven archer asked, "Do we kill blood pigeon or the Protoss first?" The high school student thought for a while and said, "Let's kill Yuting first. Otherwise he won't let us deal with blood pigeon." I don't know if you've played online games before. Let me explain. The relationship between Yuting and the Protoss is like that of 2 opposing factions in an online game. This is only the first instance where we've fought against each other. They're just like us, newbie accounts. It's just that their starting point is stronger than ours. That's why we were so passive in the beginning, allowing them to slaughter so many of our companions. However, this game has a certain degree of balance. While it gave us a poor starting setting, it also gave us humans faster advancement and more varied abilities. The foundation of all of this was built on the creativity of mortals. Our creativity in this world of missions can open up endless possibilities for us. As for these Protoss, have you noticed? Although they have also undergone an awakening, their abilities have not changed qualitatively from the beginning. The old man asked with great interest. Qualitative change? The middle school student nodded. Yes, a qualitative change. I'm not saying that they aren't getting stronger. What I mean is that their so-called awakening is simply a constant strengthening within the same scope. Considering their race and the changes in their abilities, I feel that their awakening is equivalent to removing the seal on their bodies. The female elf archer asked, "Doesn't this mean that they can obtain power more easily than us?" Peasant nodded and said, "That's correct. They can master their awakening powers faster than us because it's just a recovery process." The middle school student nodded and said, "Yes, so I suggest killing Yuting. Though I don't know why we were chosen for this mission, I feel that this matter won't end easily. This is a game, but it could also be a war. We can't let the Protoss gain the upper hand. Even if we survive this time, what about the next time? The Protoss are already stronger than us. If the final boss's rewards are generous, we'll perish in the hands of the Protoss." When everyone heard this, although they had different expressions, they all agreed with the high school student's words. "Fellow human gamers, you seem to have forgotten something. I won't die that easily. Don't you find the blood pigeon strange? It isn't dead, but it hasn't moved for a long time. If the 2 of us continue to be entangled like this, and if this blood pigeon really has something fishy about it, then it will be too late for you to regret." At that moment Yuting finally spoke up from afar. "That's right. If Lord Yuting hadn't exchanged for the world without pigeon formation, all of you would have perished. Moreover, we injured the blood pigeon and you only know how to take advantage of the situation. Now you want to kill Lord Yuting and me. Don't you feel ashamed?" Vesini, who was at the side, scolded loudly. The hale and hearty elder snorted and said, "When you killed our comrades, you didn't reason with us. Every human gamer has unique abilities. Perhaps some of the human gamers that you killed had the ability to deal with the blood pigeon. That way we could have easily cleared the instance dungeon. That's right. Now that you're about to die, you want to negotiate with us?" Rubber Girl clenched her fists and walked forward. After that punch earlier, her confidence had increased tremendously. To complement her methods, the middle school student had even secretly stuffed a rice cooker's inner into her hand while the group was chatting. What was the use of a rice cooker's inner? The authoritative expert in playing dead Qin Guang answered this question. About 30 seconds ago, someone scooped a bowl of rice cooker's blood from his butt. Someone would definitely ask, why do you have so much blood? You've been bleeding for a few minutes, so why aren't you dead? The authoritative expert in playing dead said, please read my name carefully. Repeat after me: blood. Pigeon, blood. Understood? As Rubber Girl spoke, she dipped her right fist into the rice cooker's inner. Those who didn't know better would think that she was dipping her fist into sauce. Qin Guang, who benefited the most from the current situation, was obviously happy to see this happen. Up until now, the injury on his back had mostly healed. Well, to be precise, his entire back was gone, so he didn't have any injuries at all. All he did was use what was left of his body as a foundation to regrow his skin and reconstruct his internal organs. This didn't mean that the blood pigeon had invincible regenerative abilities comparable to the Earth Beam Bomb. This was the blood pigeon's innate ability: blood transformation. It could liquefy all the blood in his body and reconstruct it. It was a pity that the part that Yu Ting had blown up was completely gone and couldn't be restored. The blood that was gushing out of his back like a fountain was actually his own doing. He pretended to be in a terrible state so that the players would let their guard down and buy more time for himself. Even though his wound had healed, it was still extremely serious. It could even be said that his bones were damaged. Regardless of whether it was the back of a human or a bird, the spine was the same. A human without a spine couldn't stand, and a bird without a spine was the same. Right now he was essentially no different from a mollusk. If he really wanted to move, he could only crawl on the ground like a snake. In his current state, he couldn't kill any of the gamers. Right now he was trying his best to use the effects of blood transformation and solidification. He was trying to crystallize a usable spine in his body. As for how to deal with the gamers, Qin Guang had made up his mind after returning to the slaughtering world. Even if you're stronger, you'll have to pay an unbearable price to kill us. How about this? I promise you that you can deal with the blood pigeon boldly. We won't interfere. Unless you're faced with an unsolvable situation and ask for my help. No matter what, this is only the first mission. We'll talk about the future in the future. Do you want to complete this mission safely? Yu Ting made another promise. Ridiculous. Why should we believe you? Peasant squinted his eyes and said, I don't care if you believe me or not. I can only tell you that the blood pigeon has recovered. Wethany, who was standing beside Yu Ting, suddenly interjected. Along with her words, the ground beneath Qin Guang suddenly trembled and flipped him over like a spatula frying vegetables. The blood covering Qin Guang's body flowed down, revealing his newly grown skin. There were no feathers on it, and it looked like the back of a graceful lady. Qin Guang's body twisted in the air. His wings were on the ground and his claws were clasped together. He looked like a cartilaginous reptile. He sprawled on the ground again, his mouth gurgling as though he was in a miserable state. This time nobody believed him. The human gamers saw that the situation was not in their favor, and they made a decision immediately. The hale and hearty elder shouted, Good, we'll believe you. Don't delay, attack. Following the old man's order, the others rushed forward one after another. This time it could be said that everyone had brought out their trump cards. The old man raised his long tang saber and dashed toward Shuigu with a few flashes on the ground. Surprisingly, he used the earth shrinking technique and dashed toward her with his saber. On the other side, the genius high school student patted his chest heavily and clenched his fists. As his hands glowed, figurines rushed out from the light. The figurines expanded with the wind and transformed into the size of a normal human. Qin Guang stared with his eyes wide open. No wonder he could summon Robot Number 1. He was definitely an anime fanatic. What did I see? Fourth Hokage. Orochimaru. Ichigo Shinozaki. Saber. Overlord's Pill. These 5 figurines that had transformed into summoned characters looked no different from real people. They rushed towards Blood Pigeon in unison. The female elven archer slowly drew her longbow, but this time she did not release the bowstring immediately. Around her longbow, countless mysterious energies were born out of the void, forming spirals and condensing around it. The energies were colorful and the magic arrow on the longbow became thicker and thicker. The wind howled and the sand and pebbles in the Colosseum flew in all directions. Receive the wrath of the Elven King. The archer let out a loud roar. Peasant, who was at the side, shot out a ray of dark light. It was the time acceleration ability that hit the magic arrow. Qin Guang stared. The old man was in danger. Chapter 1204. Out of everyone present, only Rubber Girl did not make a move against him. It was not that Rubber Girl did not have the heart to do so, but rather, everyone still did not trust Yu Ting. They had specifically asked her, who had the ability to restrain Yu Ting, to keep an eye on him and not give him any opportunities. Yu Ting didn't break his promise. He just stood there obediently with Wethany. In the blink of an eye, the old man was the first to reach a distance of about 2 feet from the blood pigeon. However, he did not completely approach it. Instead, he suddenly paused on the spot and swung his long saber downwards, slashing at the air. A crescent-shaped saber light appeared along with his movements, and it swept across the ground with a swishing of sparks. Qin Guang knew he couldn't keep up the act. His stomach bulged and he spat out a mouthful of blood gas that collided with the elderly man's sword light. A formless shockwave swept up a cloud of dust. In the blink of an eye, 5 figures broke through the dust and flew toward Blood Pigeon. They were the 5 figurines that the middle-aged man had summoned. These 5 figurines weren't the real deal. Fourth Hokage ran forward while he conjured a Rasengan and pressed it against Blood Pigeon's head. Orochimaru didn't have a Kusanagi sword. Instead, he held a Japanese samurai sword. Shinozuki Ichigo's broadsword looked like a figurine, but upon closer inspection, it wasn't sharpened. Instead, there was a blue flame on his hand. It looked like Iori Yagami, who was about to throw a wine glass. "There's something wrong with your figurines." Rubber Gal couldn't help but complain. The middle-aged man blushed and explained, "My ability is creation, but I haven't mastered it yet." While the two of them were chatting, the attacks from the 5 figurines had already landed in front of Blood Pigeon. Qin Guang swung his head in a circle, causing the feathers on his head to scatter before flying towards him and forming into a thin, yet sturdy shield that blocked the attacks of the 5 figurines and even blocked the sniper and beam gun fired by the 2 old geezers. He didn't have a chance to rest. With the combined attack of Peasant and the elf archers, the legendary Elven King's Wrath of the Time acceleration sword flew in front of him. The magic arrow was about 3 meters long and 2 feet thick. It looked more like a battering ram than an arrow. It smashed through the feather shield on top of Blood Pigeon's head and continued to move forward, heading straight for Blood Pigeon's head. Qin Guang's eyes widened in anger. What kind of joke was this? Did he really want his life? If he was hit in the head by this thing, he would either be stabbed to death or knocked to death. It seemed like he could only use his ultimate move. The Blood Pigeon let out a shrill cry, and a silk cloth suddenly appeared in front of its head. The silk grew in the wind and wrapped around the Elven King's Fury Arrow. Soon after, it twisted and wrapped around the Elven King's Fury Arrow like a dumpling wrapper. In the blink of an eye, a muffled explosion resounded, and the brocade-wrapped siege hammer suddenly exploded. The silk was constantly being stretched and countless cracks appeared on it. Streams of raging flames shot out from the cracks. Even though the scene was still terrifying, the power of the arrow was almost completely worn down. "Oh my god! What kind of move is that?" The elf archer gaped in astonishment. Just as she was speaking, the silk wrapped around the giant arrow exploded with a loud bang, turning into raging flames that shot into the sky and continued to rush forward. On the other hand, Qin Guang controlled the Blood Pigeon to roll on the ground to avoid the flames. The other gamers were dumbfounded. The slower pirated figurine couldn't dodge in time and was burned by the raging flame. In an instant, half of its body was incinerated. The power of the flames was evident. Blood Pigeon's head and back were also burned. Wherever the flames went, the blood feather was incinerated. Even the flesh underneath was peeled off and fell to the ground. It looked terrible, but Blood Pigeon managed to escape. It was just that it had become a vulture. On the other side, the hale and hearty old man, who had retreated in time, wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and turned to the archer beside him. "The power of your magic arrow is too terrifying. If I hadn't reacted fast enough, I would have been injured. Next time, you should have warned me before you used your ultimate move." The genius high school student looked at his burnt figurine and felt his heart ache. The archer explained helplessly, "You can't blame me. I didn't expect it to have such a move. Also, there won't be a next time. The Elven King's Fury is my ultimate move. The cooldown time is too long." "Look, what's this?" While they were chatting, Rubber Girl took out a piece of rag. The rag was about 1 meter long and wide, and there were burn marks on the edges. It seemed to be part of the silk cloth that had wrapped the Elven King's fury arrow. Looking at the words that were left on the rag, everyone was speechless. If they weren't mistaken, it was a Chinese character. This is the word book? Rubber Girl asked again. I saw the rag floating by just now, so I took it down to see if there was anything special about it. But this is clearly magic used by the Phantom Beast. Why would there be Chinese characters? And it's a book? Qin Guang, who was lying on the ground, chuckled inwardly as he regrown his skin and regrown his spine. You guys know nothing. I told you I was a dove, but you guys didn't believe me. Now I'm telling you that I'm actually a messenger pigeon, but you guys won't believe me either. The old man's move was called a letter to home. The itch on his back was getting stronger and stronger. Qin Guang was secretly delighted. Soon I can finally raise my head and be a man again. Oh no, a bird. In short, as long as the spine was regenerated, even if he couldn't fly because of the severe muscle loss, he could at least stand up and fight like a human. Unfortunately, the human players didn't give him enough time. Although there was a brief uproar because of the letter, they only exchanged a few words before charging at him again. I'll think of another way. You can attack first. Peasant didn't attack together with the archer. Instead, she stood at the same spot with a heavy heart. She felt that something was amiss. She was puzzled, but the situation was changing too quickly. She didn't have enough time to think, so she wasn't able to calm down and think carefully. Since the archer didn't have any more powerful moves, it was better to let the others test the waters. Sister Peasant, what's your plan? The elf archer asked as he knocked his arrow. Peasant scratched his head and said, This phantom beast is more tenacious than we imagined. If we don't think of other ways, we won't be able to kill it. You're right. Be careful. I'll go up first. The closer it is, the more powerful it will be. The archer nodded and charged forward. When they started fighting again, Peasant focused on the movements of the blood pigeon. The blood pigeon, which looked more like a reptile than a bird, rolled left and right on the ground. Occasionally it spat out air bombs and feathers. It was that tenacious. The blood pigeon's movements were like a human's. Peasant recalled the words that it had written on the ground and the word book. He was puzzled. Unlike the others, she felt that the boss was Mr. Dang. It was a pity that nobody believed her. In this place, everyone had a simple cooperative relationship with each other. The trust between people was not that strong, and she was not in any position to forcibly change the minds of others. Even she herself had wavered a few times. It was only when she saw the word book that her previous doubts returned to her heart. Under everyone's attacks, Qin Guang's situation was getting more and more difficult. Although he was trying his best to resist, the fact that he couldn't straighten his back had greatly affected him. Using unorthodox techniques allowed him to avert danger, but he couldn't seize the opportunity to attack. Even though he had relaxed and intended to kill, he couldn't kill the boss even if he wanted to. This boss is pitiful. It was unknown when Rubber Gal came to Peasant's side. Peasant hummed and said, I feel that, maybe it's Mr. Dang? Rubber Gal guessed Peasant's thoughts. It's possible. But we have no choice. If we don't kill it, we'll die. Have you thought that it's not only Mr. Dang but it's also a famous person? Rubber Gal was puzzled as she asked, famous outside. Then her eyes lit up and she stomped her foot. Gosh, why didn't I think of that? I'm silly. What's wrong? Rubber Gal had a complicated expression. No, nothing. She muttered to herself, this unlucky B** starred, what should I do? What do you know? Peasant was anxious. Rubber Gal gritted her teeth and said, I was silly. I came here suddenly and my thoughts were chaotic. I didn't notice such a simple problem. Now that you reminded me, I'm able to react. Forget it, I'm 100% sure Blood Pigeon is Mr. Dang. How can you be so sure? It was Peasant who couldn't make up his mind. Rubber Gal rolled her eyes and thought, can I tell you? Qin Guang, is there something wrong with you? Why did you suddenly become a boss? Just as Qin Guang had guessed, Rubber Gal was Sister Lu Fei. Why was she Rubber Gal? The reason was very simple. Lu's chemical industry was involved in a variety of chemical industries. In addition to mining, it also involved a lot of rubber industries. The branch company that Lu Fei was previously in charge of was one of the top 5 rubber raw material processing enterprises in China. Lu Fei knew Grand Magus right and knew that Qin Guang wasn't an ordinary person. Combining this with the current situation, she instantly guessed the relationship between Qin Guang, Mr. Dang, and Blood Pigeon. Previously, in her heart, Qin Guang, as the great Magister Right, was a mage from the Dolua world that he mentioned. This time she thought that she had been involved in another abnormal situation. Although it was inconceivable, the experienced Ruffy was not particularly flustered. She had relied on her own ability to play the pig to eat the tiger all the way until now, successfully becoming the strongest player against the Protoss. She was still thinking of showing off to Qin Guang after this matter was over. Weren't you unwilling to teach me magic? Now I have my own arcana. Though it was awkward for a female to become a rubber gal, wasn't it better than nothing? Luffy, who had once watched One Piece and learned the entire Rubberman battle strategy from the protagonist of the same name, Luffy, wasn't flustered at all. But now she was flustered. Don't ask me why, it's too late to explain. Really, believe me, this is Mr. Dang. I can swear to you. What do we do now? Lu Fei didn't care how Mr. Dang died. But if it was Qin Guang, it would be a different story. You know he's Qin Guang? You mean that super internet celebrity Almighty Superman? Peasant suddenly asked softly. Lu Fei trembled before she helplessly nodded her head. I'm 99% certain that he's Qin Guang. Why do you think he's Dang? It was hard to pronounce, but Peasant understood. Peasant shook his head and said, I can't tell you, but that's what I think. Lu Fei nodded and said, forget it, let's not think about this. We have to convince the others. I don't believe Qin Guang will kill us. You must have guessed who I am. Peasant asked, yes, will the others be able to guess it? Lu Fei shook her head and said, impossible, the others don't understand him. How can they link two people with different appearances? Peasant asked coldly, are you one of his people? Do you understand him? Lu Fei grinned and said, aren't you the same? You are. Lu Fei didn't answer and said, let's talk after we get out of here. We'll look for him together. Don't worry, as long as he's around we can turn misfortunes into blessings. I understand him. As he spoke, Lu Fei recalled what happened when he destroyed the World Breaker. He was capable of unleashing such devastating power. There was no way he would be stumped by becoming a boss. Lu Fei guessed half of it. In terms of destructive power and the scope of the mission, the world of slaughter wasn't comparable to the world of punishment from the world of destruction. But in terms of the level of the world within a cup and the laws that Qin Guang had come into contact with, the world of slaughter was much higher than the world of punishment. I think I have a way to prove that he's one of us, Peasant said with determination. Lu Fei was puzzled as Peasant ran forward. Luffy was puzzled, but Peasant ran forward with big strides. What's she trying to do? While Lu Fei was in a daze, Peasant was less than 10 meters away from the Blood Pigeon. She raised the hourglass with her right hand and said calmly, if she's Mr. Dang, she won't attack me. What? You're crazy. Peasant, what are you doing? Everyone stop her. Isn't she seeking death? Lu Fei was shocked and the other players were even more dumbfounded and panicked. They were on the same side. If they were to fight against the Celestials or the mythical beast, Peasant's time manipulation was crucial. Everyone had a good impression of her. Besides the Celestials, nobody wanted to see her die. But it was too late. The gamers didn't expect Qin Guang to be the most flustered. Just now he flapped his wings with the intention of launching a sea of blood to send the gamers flying to buy time. He didn't think much of Peasant's approach because he knew that Peasant wasn't suited to be near him. He thought Peasant was going to throw the time manipulation from afar to slow down and increase the strength of the sea of blood. Peasant charged forward. His blood sea had surged forward like a tidal wave and he couldn't retract it. Qin Guang was burning with anxiety. What a troublemaker. I don't care if the others die, but I don't want you to die. Chapter 1205. Peasant took 2 steps forward and saw the oncoming sea of blood. At this moment she had 2 choices. One was to use her time ability to slow down the sea of blood in front of her, and the other was to accelerate herself before turning around and running. Or she could continue to run against the power of the sea of blood and prove to the others that the magical beast was Mr. Dang. Peasant pondered for less than a second. Then, under the bewildered gazes of everyone, she took a step forward and dived into the blood sea. She felt that she couldn't retreat. This was her last chance to convince the others. Like Rubber Gal, Peasant guessed that Mr. Dang's identity was Qin Guang. She also thought that Qin Guang recognized her. In that case he would definitely not kill her, nor would he kill Rubber Girl. However, he was not so merciful to the others. There were only 7 human players left. In other words, other than himself and Rubber Gal, the rest were within the range of his ability to kill, just like the people who had died in his hands before. There were still many humans. If one or two of them died, the humans wouldn't have such deep feelings. But now, those who didn't fit in with the group and might become hidden dangers in the future were all dead. Although the remaining people didn't form a team from the beginning, they had already recognized each other since dawn was coming. Every surviving human player would become a valuable resource for their faction in the future. No one wanted to see their comrades sacrificed again. Therefore, as long as Shui Ying killed another person, no matter how he explained, no one would believe him. At that time, apart from himself and Rubber Girl, everyone else would die. As for Yu Ting and Vasani, they looked like they were at the end of their tether. But until the last moment, no one knew if the cunning Protoss had any other trump cards up their sleeves. Hence she couldn't allow any more humans to die. Peasant was engulfed by the sea of blood in the blink of an eye. However, she did not completely let go of her defenses. The hourglass was spinning frantically, forming a thin layer of protective film on the surface of her combat uniform. The blood that came into contact with this protective film quickly dried up and aged. Not only that, the improved version of the elven rattan armor on her body also released a layer of energy barrier, embedded between the protective membrane of time and the rattan armor, resisting the impact of the blood that penetrated through. As time passed, the two energy barriers were quickly broken. Streaks of dark red blood swept past her combat uniform, like a sharp blade cutting through paper, leaving behind one wound after another on her thighs, abdomen, arms, and other parts of her body. Qin Guang, who was in the form of a blood pigeon, could only watch helplessly. He was already desperately trying to think of a way to retract the corrosive and cutting power of the blood sea, but as the saying goes, spilled water can't be taken back easily. How could he retract his ultimate move just because he wanted to? Unfortunately, he couldn't speak at the moment. He could only stare helplessly at everything that was happening with his pigeon eyes. Is there a hole in your brain? Are you an idiot or what? I don't want to kill you, but you're courting death. What do you want me to do? At the back of the crowd, Lu Fei, who knew Peasant's motive, was watching nervously. She was observing Blood Pigeon's situation and Peasant's situation. Just as the two of them had guessed, Blood Pigeon's human-like eyes revealed a hint of panic. He didn't want to kill Peasant. Lu Fei was in deep thought. Things were getting out of control. If everything was under Blood Pigeon's control, he wouldn't be panicking. Could it be that he was unable to control the gushing blood? Lu Fei gritted her teeth and couldn't be bothered to monitor Yu Ting. She took a step forward and punched with her rubber bullet fist at the spot where Peasant had plunged into the sea of blood. Wherever the fist landed, the red blood flowed, but Lu Fei's powerful rubber bullet only penetrated less than half a meter into the sea of blood before it retreated helplessly. The blood looked fluid, but it was extremely dense and corrosive. On the other side, the other gamers stopped attacking and focused on rescuing Peasant. Of course, the attacks that they had launched earlier were all blocked. For example, the one-punch Superman Saitama, who was summoned by the high school student, gave Qin Guang a fright. After taking a closer look, Qin Guang calmed down. Saitama's figurine was a pirated one, and there was a small tuft of hair on his head. The pirated figurine punched out, but before it could exert any power, it was engulfed by a wave of the sea of blood and disappeared. The magic arrows shot by the archers weren't effective either. Without Peasant's time acceleration, the magic arrows couldn't reach the sea of blood. The slightest splash in the sea of blood would cause the magic arrows to explode. Though Peasant, who was trapped in the sea of blood, had his suspicions confirmed, he didn't expect the sea of blood to be so powerful. She squeezed the hourglass in her hand helplessly. Then she gritted her teeth and threw it out. As the hourglass left her hand, it was swept away by the sea of blood. In the blink of an eye, the hourglass trembled violently. No matter how the hourglass shook, the sand that would seep down in an orderly manner suddenly went out of control. In the small hourglass, countless extremely fine grains of sand of time created a feeling of a sandstorm in this narrow space. Suddenly, Peasant clenched her right fist, and the indestructible hourglass that was swept a few meters in front of her cracked. The body of the hourglass wasn't made of ordinary glass. It contained the power of the rules and was a dimension barrier that could isolate the invasion of time and space. Then Peasant said in her heart, "Time storm." As her voice fell, the cracks on the hourglass in the distance rapidly spread. A strange cracking sound reverberated throughout the entire Colosseum. Though the sound wasn't loud, it sounded as though it was right beside everyone's ears. In the blink of an eye, an orange-yellow sandstorm engulfed the area where the hourglass exploded. The grains of sand in the hourglass were only the weight of a fist, but now, it became an earth-shattering sandstorm. The grains of sand flew in all directions with heavy historical vicissitudes. Wherever the grains of sand passed, the sea of blood dried up and the land cracked. The concept of time and space was broken. Peasant took the chance to escape. As for Qin Guang, he felt relieved when he saw that his blood ocean technique was broken. Though he was in the middle of the time sandstorm tornado as a mythical beast boss, he wouldn't die of old age no matter how Peasant accelerated or slowed down time. He didn't panic. However, his complacency didn't last long. A moment later, a look of horror appeared on his face. Peasant had lost control of the power of the hourglass. The sandstorm that was about to soar into the sky suddenly spun in the opposite direction after exceeding a certain limit. Then the sand converged again. Peasant was surrounded by the other gamers. What are you thinking? Do you want to die? We said that even if he's a mister, we can't do anything about it. You almost died just now. Can you exchange for the hourglass? Peasant wasn't bothered by the criticism or concern of the gamers. He looked ahead nervously. After the hourglass exploded, she didn't know what would happen next. When she saw the sandstorm reverse, she was shocked. This time, what's wrong? Ruffy asked nervously. Peasant replied, time is turning back. In the distance, the sandstorm gradually became smaller and smaller. Then it converged at Blood Pigeon's side. The sea of blood, which had already dried up, became liquid once again. The gamers could see the human-shaped hole in the sea of blood where Peasant was. All this took a long time to describe, but in the blink of an eye, the sandstorm in the sky suddenly disappeared. Blood Pigeon lay quietly on the ground. He maintained the posture of flapping his wings to blast out of the sea of blood. Under the effect of time reversal, his sure-kill sea of blood had also returned to his body. Where's your hourglass? If you can turn back time, your hourglass should be able to appear again. The middle schooler asked bewilderedly. Over there. The sharp-eyed elf archer pointed at the shattered glass on the ground and shouted in surprise. The hourglass didn't regenerate? Peasant didn't understand what was going on. Ruffy was puzzled and asked, where's the sand? Where's the sand of time? Peasant thought for a while and said, perhaps when the sea of blood returned to his body, it was brought into his body? Perhaps only Qin Guang knew what he was feeling at this moment. As a bird, no, a dove, using the power of blood as a guide, he should be a domineering devil. It was a pity that the enemy was too powerful and he didn't hold back. He was raped until now. It wasn't easy for him to figure out a way, but he didn't have the chance to try it. Then he almost killed someone he didn't want to kill. Now something even stranger happened. His body was stuffed with sand. He felt like a duck waiting to be sold in the market. His stomach was filled with sand. But his previous self was the earth paste exploder. He was the strongest earth elemental creature. He couldn't be poisoned by the sand, right? As he was thinking, the sand of time in his stomach released the power of time. Qin Guang swallowed his saliva. Things were getting more and more troublesome. Chapter 1206. Intense pain came from his body, and Qin Guang could clearly sense that every single cell in his body was being corroded by time. Some cells were regaining their youth, some were aging rapidly, and some were at a loss of where to go. Every cell seemed to have its own thoughts, and they were thinking about life. Who am I? Where did I come from? Why am I here? Where am I going? At this moment, the thoughts formed from 10,000 nerve endings were cursing in Qin Guang's heart. It wasn't that his stomach was stuffed with sand, but that the damned sand of time had entered his body along with his blood and entered his countless cells along with the power of his blood. If he had to use scientific theories to explain his current situation, that was the only conclusion Qin Guang could come up with. He admired himself. No matter how strange the situation was, he was still able to find support for himself with theories that seemed reliable but were actually completely unscientific. Fortunately, he wasn't treated as a scientist when he was young. Otherwise, he would be more of a Frankenstein than Nicole. The question was, what should he do? Should he die of old age, or should he be turned back into an egg by time? It was a dilemma. Death was something he could not allow to happen. Even if it was Peasant, he couldn't let her kill him. Otherwise he would be finished. But he couldn't live either. Otherwise the others would be finished. In the end he had to die, but how he died was very particular. He had to die with skill, depth, and integrity. He definitely couldn't be easily defeated like an ordinary game boss. At this moment, Qin Guang was feeling extremely weird. He felt uncomfortable yet comfortable at the same time. The power of time couldn't kill him. In this strange bloodshed dimension, the blood pigeon had eternal life. He could only be killed by the gamers and not die of old age. In World of Warcraft, the gamers could enter the instance dungeon and hack for 10,000 years. As long as the power wasn't cut off, the boss would stand there forever. How could the gamers wait for the boss to die of old age? In addition, under the constant invasion of the misplaced power of time, some cells aged while others became more and more energetic. However, the aging and dying cells would not disappear. Instead, after crossing a certain boundary, they would quickly jolt back and return to the direction of rejuvenation. This was the state of his body at the moment. It was rather distorted. This is a good chance to kill him. The old man frowned and said, I don't know what happened, but Miss Peasant's hourglass injured him severely. We can't afford to lose this opportunity. Let's seize it. Wait. Peasant and Lu Fei shouted in unison. The two of you, although we belong to the same faction and have relied on your help before at this critical moment of life and death, we really have no reason to be willful with you. We've said it many times. Even if it's really Mr. Dang, we still have to kill it. Otherwise, we'll be the ones to die. You two might not be afraid of death, but that doesn't mean we're willing to die with you. A strong man behind the old man said in a low and muffled voice. His words were filled with dissatisfaction. Who wants to talk nonsense with you? Anyway, we said that we can't do it. If anyone is stubborn, don't blame me for being impolite. Lu Fei was infuriated. She glared angrily and extended her arm in front of everyone. Her arm was emitting white smoke and emitting pink radiance. The genius student gaped in shock. Gosh, second gear? Lu Fei grinned and said, Why? Do you know your stuff? Oh no. The bird is standing up. While they were dawdling, the blood pigeon that was sprawled on the ground suddenly screeched, giving everyone a fright. They stared at the blood pigeon that had been pretending to be a mollusk for a long time. The blood pigeon spread its wings and stood up with great difficulty. With the interference of the time sand, even though it was difficult, the Chen's peace pigeon had regained its spine after such a long time. But it didn't charge at Yu Ting or the humans. Instead it screeched again. Thick, viscous blood gushed out of its body. It looked like a fountain. Everyone thought it was going to unleash a powerful attack, but after a few screeches, the blood pigeon's huge body inexplicably collapsed. It's dead? What's going on? You ask me, but who am I supposed to ask? Who's going to go take a look? On the other side, Yu Ting and Wethany were also talking. Master Yu Ting, what should we do now? The blood pigeon is dying. It's not dead. Not only is it not dead, but its body is surging with new energy. I can feel it. It's as vigorous as the breath of the goddess of life. Then should we attack? If this phantom beast recovers to its peak, we won't have any chance of winning. It won't. The life force in its body looks terrifying, but it's like a castle in the air. My attack just now really did injure it. It's already at the end of its tether. Then should we? No, let's wait and see. I don't have much divine power left. Even my spirit is exhausted. So that's it. There's no rush. I have the speed of lightning. At the last moment I can avoid the mortals and deal the final blow. These mortals are too naive. Nobody can stop the power of lightning. The blood pigeon will probably massacre the mortals and make them suffer. We can sit back and enjoy the fruits of his labor. My lord is wise. The mortals were perplexed. The blood pigeon, who was sprawled on the ground, started struggling violently as though he was in extreme pain. He started rolling on the ground. Peasant and Lu Fei were worried, but they couldn't help. The others were eager to give it a try. They really wanted to rush up and finish off their opponent, but Lu Fei was glaring at them fiercely. Peasant exclaimed in surprise. Oh my God. Lu Fei asked anxiously. What's wrong? She didn't dare to turn her head to look at the blood pigeon. She focused her gaze on the other gamers. Peasant covered his mouth and said, It laid an egg. What? Lu Fei's entire body trembled and she almost laughed out loud. Finally, she was willing to turn her face away. Just as Peasant said, the blood pigeon struggled for a while before it lost all signs of life. A 3-meter-long egg-shaped object popped out from between its legs. That was an egg. Is the blood pigeon female? The high school student asked. Right at that moment, the eggshell suddenly cracked open and a figure jumped out from within. Everyone be careful. The old man warned. Damn you, female. This isn't laying an egg. This is nirvana. Do you understand? This is nirvana. When the figure spoke, the gamers were taken aback. Then they were overjoyed. Qin Guang had transformed into a bald man and jumped out from the eggshell. The series of events made him feel as though he was on the brink of death. Previously, under the impact of the time sand, the cells in his body vibrated under the two states of acceleration and reversal. Finally, when a cell's time reversal exceeded its limit, the situation took a turn for the better. The small cell lost the characteristics of the blood pigeon due to the reversal of time. It reverted to a human cell in the form of another person. Then, the innate ability of the earth paste exploder appeared out of nowhere in this cell. In a flash, the natural ability regenerated itself and grew stronger. It pounced on the nearby cells and was able to resist the aging effects of the time sand. But that wasn't the end of it. Although the sand of time was a mystical tool that had the rules of time attached to it, it was essentially still within the realm of the earth element. The innate ability of the earth paste exploder swallowed the sand of time in one gulp. Of course, it did not let go of the law of time contained in it. However, Qin Guang couldn't control this matter, just like how he couldn't stop his heart from beating just by thinking about it. It was all driven by his instincts. This kind of innate ability that came from nothing, and the feeling of extremely strong and rapid recovery was simply too wonderful for words. But it wasn't without its disadvantages. The cells that were affected by the natural ability of the earth burner belonged to his human form, but the other cells in his body were different from humans. A human body was made up of both human and bird cells. It was like putting a bicycle chain on a supercar. It was very awkward. At the same time, Qin Guang had an absurd feeling. He was the final boss of the mission, the blood pigeon, but he was also a human player who participated in the mission. As soon as this thought appeared in his mind, an indescribable idea flashed across his mind. He instantly made a decision. It was time to end things. Am I stupid? I'm a player too. I can kill the boss too. If I kill the boss, I'll complete the mission. So the slaughtering world has to let me live. Although I'm the boss, if the boss dies, I'll die too. However, such a brain-burning paradox should be left to the heavenly Holy Grail to make its own judgment. Previously, he was considering whether he should take the risk. Now that he had the regenerative ability of the earth burner, all his problems were resolved. Should he try to commit suicide? When the bystanders saw him stand up, they thought he had purposely positioned the two bodies so that the human cells would sink. At the same time, he detonated the power of the blood pigeon in his body. After successfully locating him, Qin Guang fell down again. The explosions in his body did not stop for even a moment, but under his deliberate control, all the power of the great earth exploder was concentrated in his lower body. Qin Guang first formed a hard shell for himself, and then stuffed all the innate abilities of the great earth exploder into it, reconstructing his body. Finally, he completed the nirvana process. He made the right bet. Congratulations, player at noon, for killing the blood pigeon and completing the mission. The reward distribution is as follows. At noon's damage is 45%, Yu Ting's damage is 31%. Yu Ting was dumbfounded. He was waiting to kill Steel. What was going on? Besides Lu Fei and Peasant, the other human gamers didn't fare any better. Mr. At Noon, who had disappeared for a long time, reappeared and the mission ended? What the hell happened? What was the point of coming to this mission space? If they were about to be teleported out, what was the point of distributing the reward points? Overall mission completion assessment, human wins. Just as everyone was lost in their thoughts, another notification sound rang out. Though they didn't know the benefits of the announcement, they were happy that their side had won. They didn't have time to greet each other. Swoosh swoosh swoosh, they vanished. Qin Guang turned to look at Yu Ting and Wethany. They stared at each other from afar. Yu Ting and Wethany's figures also began to fade. It was just as they had said, they were just projections. After everyone left, a time and space vortex appeared above Qin Guang's head. He raised his head and slowly rose into the sky. He had too many questions in his heart that he wanted answers from Lioli. Chapter 1207. Luli, I think you have to give me an explanation. What exactly is going on right now? Looking at Luli, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground and pretending to be dead, Qin Guang asked. Luli ignored him and did not get up. She continued to sit there with an unperturbed look on her face. Also, why did the deer cry fruit disappear? What's going on? After that, Qin Guang pointed outside the Cloud City's walls. The massive plant that should have been standing there had disappeared without a trace. Hey! I'm talking to you very seriously, can you please be a little more serious? Seeing that Luli was still pretending to be oblivious to what was going on outside, Qin Guang could not help but reach out and push her. An inconceivable thing happened, he actually pushed the air. His palm went straight through Liuli's body and it even caused a ripple. Fake projection. Qin Guang was furious in his heart. Luli! Come out. Don't try to hide from me. I know you're here. He shouted loudly. Alright, I'm really impressed by you. Finally, Luli's figure reappeared behind him. Qin Guang turned around and looked at her. You're finally willing to come out. After such a big change, you can't possibly not give me any explanation, right? Luli shrugged. If I tell you that I don't know what happened, will you be angered to death? Qin Guang clutched his chest. Before I die, I'll strangle you to death first. Alright, I was just joking with you. Listen to this, Empress slowly. Seeing that he really had signs of collapsing, Luli quickly became serious. About 2 hours later, after Qin Guang and Luli had a long talk, he still left Cloud City with 10,000 dissatisfaction. Compared to before, Liuli's attitude had changed greatly. She was no longer so cold and arrogant. She often prayed for her own good fortune and said that there would always be a way out. She was indeed trying very hard to explain. This meant that the slaughter world this time had actually exceeded her expectations. This was indeed a situation that she did not understand. After losing contact with both parties, she did not stay idle. She was also doing her best to decipher and analyze the changes in the Holy Grail. But it was extremely embarrassing. Everything seemed to be the same as before, but the result was that other people in the divine race had entered the world in the cup. As for Yu Ting, Liuli also recognized him. He was indeed one of the top-ranked god emperors in the endless god realm, and he was the sovereign of lightning. In addition, Luli did not know where Lu Ming had gone or what had happened. Just as the slaughtering world began, the huge deer cry flower that was growing outside Cloud City suddenly became illusory and then completely disappeared. Before this, there were no signs. Luli tried everything she could but was unable to communicate with Lu Ming. As for how the world in the cup would develop in the future, Lori gave a definite answer. There was no doubt that the Holy Grail had been upgraded, and the world in the cup would be at the level of the third layer, the Cloud Elephant Sky. But the appearance of the Divine Emperor Yu Ting and the other divine race indicated that the Holy Grail and the Endless God Realm must have been forcibly established some kind of connection, allowing those divine race to descend into the mission world of the cup. Correspondingly, at the same time, perhaps because of the continuous integration of the real world and the real world that Qin Guang was in had also established a connection with the world in the cup. In order to achieve a certain degree of balance, the Holy Grail forcibly created two opposing camps. According to the normal setting, Qin Guang himself should be able to freely choose a camp to join. He would not be the boss that needed to kill all the players. This time there was just an accident and then it was forcibly restored. Perhaps it was because the Holy Grail was simple, or it could be due to the situation that happened in the 8th mission. The world in the cup simply made him the boss. The Holy Grail did not consider the emotional inclination of Qin Guang as a human. Because of this, Qin Guang's mind was even tortured to the point that he coincidentally took a walk outside. It was a blessing in disguise as he solved the problem of being a killer. Moreover, it made his mind more resilient, indirectly helping him to complete the process of turning into an egg. It could be said that he had turned misfortune into fortune and cleverly survived this crisis. But from the next world in the cup in the Cloud Elephant Sky, it should have a more mature and complete camp and ability system from the start. The use and distribution of reward points should also be more rigorous. As for what would happen to those players who were reset, Luli also assured him. The divine race entered the world in the cup as a projection. Although the humans entered with their entire minds, the so-called reset was actually rewind. It allowed the players' memories to return to the moment before they entered. It was not a true death. For those who were rewound in the first mission, nothing would change. Perhaps they would only yawn in a trance, then feel a little dispirited and continue doing what they were supposed to do. Or perhaps he was simply in a dream and didn't have the slightest bit of awareness. Luli was not sure what would happen to the 7 surviving gamers, but Qin Guang was not concerned. Peasant's suspected target was not far from him. The matter of the killer was settled, so he could drive back to the filming site to take a look. In addition, he could also call Sister Lu Fei now. If she remembered anything, she would not hide it from him. Qin Guang hoped that the gamers would retain their memories. He would definitely choose the humans so they would be able to help him in the future. In the Heavenly Holy Cup, where both sides fought for the fruit of victory, the benefits of the human race's victory would definitely be greater than the god race's victory. However, he was still a little worried. He was not sure if these people's abilities would be inherited in the real world. If that happened with the supernatural abilities of the 7 gamers, things would get out of hand. Peasant and Sister Lu Fei were still within his control, but the other 5 gamers would cause a huge commotion and have an immeasurable impact. On second thought, there would be another quest and more players would be chosen to participate in this quest. In the future, there would definitely be more and more players. Therefore, the entire world, it was hair-raising. Qin Guang quickly retreated from the world in the cup. When he regained his senses and opened his eyes, the car was still speeding on the highway. Not far ahead was a highway exit. As a young man of the new era, even though he was the god of racing, Qin Guang drove the car out of the highway before stopping by the roadside to make a call. He called Ruffy first. "Oh, you rascal, you finally remembered me. Sup. Why are you calling me so early in the morning? Didn't the internet say that you were filming a program?" When the call connected, Qin Guang didn't even have the time to speak before Lu Fei interrupted him with her words. Based on his understanding of Sister Lu Fei, she wasn't the real rubber girl. But this was impossible. In the world in the cup, he had exchanged a glance with her, and this matter was set in stone. When Qin Guang pretended to be dead on the ground, his ears didn't relax. He heard the conversation between Peasant and Lu Fei clearly. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so sure of their identities. Now that she spoke and knew that he wasn't a normal gamer, there was only one explanation. She couldn't remember anything like the gamers who were reset. If that was the case, surviving to the end of the mission or not didn't make a difference whether they would be reset or not. No, nothing. Oh yes, did anything special happen? Qin Guang asked unwillingly. Lu Fei snorted and said, "Why are you asking me? Your house was bombed. Don't you know?" "I know. Of course I know. It's fine. The martial arts expert you sent is connected to my house's security system. I'm safer than the President of the United States. Seriously, why did you let others put such a high bounty on your head? Do you know who did it?" Qin Guang was taken aback. Then he stomped his feet. "Gosh. I'm stupid. Why did he scold me? When I was in the state of consciousness, I killed so many assassins without any psychological pressure. Then I returned to the world in the cup, but I forgot something important. Why did I forget to find trouble with those fellows who offered bounties?" Counting with his fingers, Mei Zhonghong would definitely not be able to escape responsibility. Sanxing Group was most likely on the list. The motive of the Japanese financial group was also worth considering. Why didn't I think of going for a stroll? But he immediately felt relieved. At that time, although his search for the assassin organization seemed to be untraceable, in fact there was a pattern. He already knew the location of the potential targets of each assassin organization from the intelligence provided by the General Administration of Guangding. Then, with a thought, the target of the assassin, which was his family and friends, would have a mysterious telepathic connection with him. Then, with this telepathic connection as a guide, he could appear next to the target of the assassin. At the same time, no matter how powerful the assassin was, they would always think about this matter, and then they would be captured by Qin Guang's mind. The expert who dared to accept this $400 million bounty would not be a lone ranger. There was a strong organization behind him that provided him with intelligence support. There would be another kind of telepathic connection between the two, which would also be captured by Qin Guang, who was in the soul state. When Qin Guang was searching for a target, he didn't deliberately choose the target. Instead, he would directly fly over when he sensed it, so sometimes he would directly float to the other party's nest. As for the organization that accepted the mission and the person who issued the mission, the connection between them wasn't that strong. Instead, the mission was directly issued and accepted through the two-way confidential dark web, so it wouldn't be automatically captured by Qin Guang at that time. Of course, if he chose to fly over at that time, he should have been able to find the person. Unfortunately, he was in the middle of the Slaughtering World mission at that time, and he was turned into a pigeon to be beaten. He was very busy and panicked, so he forgot. After crushing 27,638 souls with his own hands, he hurriedly returned. Now that Lu Fei reminded him, he remembered. But now that things had come to this, there was nothing to regret. Anyway, after this sudden change, there would no longer be any blind assassin in the world who would come to seek death. For a short period of time, he didn't need to worry about the safety of his family. The ones who should be afraid and worried should be the survivors, who hadn't been involved in the big pot of 400 million bounty. A weak organization that was originally ranked outside the top 500 in the world suddenly woke up and became the world's #1. Was it a surprise? Was it a surprise? Was it happy? Definitely not happy. Everyone would be more concerned about another question. Why did those big shots suddenly go crazy? What did they have in common? This common characteristic was very easy to find. They were all tempted by the 400 million bounty and took action, then they all went crazy. In addition, Qin Guang didn't intend to completely relax the security. He still had to go home to take a look and settle the situation at home. Then, of course, he had to find those people who put up the bounty to settle the score. But now he had other more important things to ask. No, you don't have to worry too much about the assassins for now. Just now, didn't anything strange happen in your mind? Qin Guang's question was very direct. Strange things? No, by the way, I accidentally spilled water on my clothes when I was drinking. Does that count? No, it's fine. Then I'll hang up first. After hanging up, Qin Guang turned the car around and drove in the direction of the set. Seeing him return, Zhou Xian, who was reshooting the show with the director, looked confused. Didn't you go home? Qin Guang looked down at his watch. There are still 2 hours before the plane leaves. I thought it would be useless to rush to the airport now, so I came back to take a look. Are you worried about the effect of the show? Is our show that important this time? Zhou Xian asked in surprise. Qin Guang laughed. Of course it's important. After all, this is Tianguang Media's first big project. The company also has $1 billion from the Shanghai Financial Group. If we don't get a good start, we won't be able to explain it to others. Zhou Xian nodded. I didn't do a good job. I took it for granted. The first 3 episodes should have been based on other people's successful experiences. Qin Guang waved his hand. It's not your fault. If it were me, I would have done the same. I don't have any experience in such a big investment project, so I couldn't give any useful advice. Zhou Xian secretly rolled her eyes. She only felt that she really couldn't understand this guy. If you really valued it so much, why did you mess up the shooting order before? I was already prepared to lower my standards for the 4th episode. Aren't you trying to trick me now? Zhou Xian felt a mouthful of blood in her chest, but she couldn't say anything. After all, he was the boss and he had given her enough trust and support in the first 3 episodes. In the end, the show that relied on his fame and the brand bonus didn't reach its goal, so they had no choice but to pull him in for the 4th episode. Although it was difficult for others to comply with his request, he was a big shot and he was the boss. No one had the right to say no. Okay, are you going to say hello to the others now? Or shoot another 2 scenes? Zhou Xian looked back at the set. The director was so angry that he was shouting. The guests who participated in the filming were complaining about how difficult it was to say their lines and make expressions to the air. Qin Guang looked down at his watch again. Forget it. I have to leave soon. Then what's the point of coming back? Zhou Xian looked confused. Qin Guang looked at her straight in the eyes. You really don't feel anything amiss? Zhou Xian nodded. Something is wrong. Qin Guang was overjoyed. Really? Do you remember what just happened? Just now. 15 minutes ago. Qin Guang pinched his fingers and counted. He had just come out of the massacre world 15 minutes ago. Zhou Xian pinched her chin and thought for a moment. At that time, Director Zhou said he wanted to reshoot a scene and asked me to arrange for someone to communicate with the Hercules from America. I had just called the people from the company over to explain something and then, as she thought about it, Zhou Xian suddenly clapped her hands. That's right, it's a little strange. I was just explaining it to them when I suddenly got distracted and stopped talking. When I came back to my senses, the staff was shocked and asked me if I was overtired. Qin Guang raised his eyebrows slightly. There's such a phenomenon? Zhou Xian rubbed the bridge of her nose. It's quite strange. You might not know this, but no matter what I do, as long as I want to do it wholeheartedly, I will never feel tired. It's even more impossible for me to get distracted while talking to others. That's why I'm always called a genius. I learn things quickly. As she spoke, she remembered who the person in front of her was. Well, she shouldn't have shown off in front of him. He was a genius, yes. But the boss in front of her was the Grand Master of Geniuses. However, Qin Guang still understood what was going on and suddenly asked, "Oh, right. You used to have a pen name online, Xianxia, right? Did you help me write a hydrology article? Did you help me clean up my mess?" Chu Zijin's eyes lit up. "Well, how did you know? I thought no one would bring it up again. Did you read my article? How can that be called cleaning up your mess?" "I'm telling the truth." Qin Guang made an "oh" sound. "I understand. That's strange. You're a good girl. Why would you use a Chinese chess name?" Chu Zijin shrugged. "My surname is Chu. When I first registered my social media account, I was learning Chinese chess at the Chinese Qiyuan, so I casually used this name." "Can't I?" "Okay, I understand. If there's nothing else, I'll make a move first. You carry on with your work." Qin Guang turned and left without dilly-dallying. According to Chu Zijin's words, it was as he had guessed. Chu Zijin was indeed a peasant. There was no way out. With Qin Guang's acting skills and sensitivity to other people's microexpressions, he was 100% sure that Chu Zijin was not lying. There was only one explanation. She was not reset, but she could not remember anything. Qin Guang speculated that it was the first appearance of the slaughtering world in a cup. There were too many loopholes and bugs, causing the mortal players to be unable to retain their memories when they escaped. Their abilities should not have been inherited into the real world. There must be a bug in the slaughtering world. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been a repair process. Forget it. As for what would happen in the future, he would know in the next slaughtering world in a cup. Raising his head to look at the sky, Qin Guang noticed that the world that was violently trembling had returned to its calm state. But he could clearly feel that the distance between the real world and the real world was getting closer. After Qin Guang left, Chu Zijin was also baffled by this matter. She put her hand in her pocket and was about to walk back when she suddenly exclaimed in surprise. She took out a memory card from her pocket. "What's this? Strange. When did this thing come into my pocket?" Back on the set, for some reason, Chu Zijin found someone to bring a card reader over. She went back to the RV alone and inserted the memory card into it. A long 4K video was stored in the memory card. Chu Zijin was dumbfounded when she saw the video. What is this?" Chapter 1208. A familiar figure appeared in front of her. It was Qin Guang himself. At this time, a strange creature was flying in the air in front of him. Chu Zijin paused the picture and zoomed in. Thanks to the effect of the 4K ultra-high-definition video, she could tell that it was a mosquito with a ridiculously large body. Qin Guang was standing proudly in the same place like a god of war, throwing all kinds of heavy punches at these mosquitoes. Not only that, from time to time he leaped into the air like the martial arts masters in the TV and movies. He stepped on the air and used the lightness kung fu that was better than the Wudong cloud ladder, twisting and turning in the air, throwing one heavy punch after another. However, these mosquitoes were not easy to deal with. They looked slender, but in fact they were extremely tough. Their bodies were glowing with a strange light, and each of them was as tenacious and tough as a monster. In order to deal with these strange mosquitoes that were getting stronger and stronger, the strength and power of his punches were getting stronger and stronger. To put it simply, it could even be said that he was about to rise from the ordinary level of intermediate martial arts to the fantasy level of advanced martial arts. This crazy killing continued for a long time. Then, the image changed and the opponent in front of him was simply changed to a fantasy type of giant stone man. As a young man who dabbled in a wide range of things, Chu Zijin could certainly recognize that these stone men were basically the same thing as the Hellfire in the large-scale online game World of Warcraft that had once been popular all over the world. Then, under her incredulous gaze, her boss, Qin Guang himself, was simply transformed into an invincible god of war with a full body of superb equipment. He fought with countless Hellfire alone, displaying his strength vividly in a rather magical way. This was not the end. After these Hellfire suddenly became corpses in a way that she could not understand, the image changed again and it was Qin Guang himself who appeared in a white maze-like tunnel, facing all kinds of monsters of different sizes, but each wave was so strong that it made people's hair stand on end. Some of these monsters were humanoid and some were strangely shaped. Some were big and some were small, but without exception, The strength and speed of each monster far exceeded the limits of human understanding. These things looked like real monsters, but they also looked like the effects of unparalleled computer special effects. Even if it was just a simple exchange of punches and kicks, the vibrations caused in the video seemed to be earth-shattering. The entire video was shot through a single long shot. There were no scenes or camera changes. Frankly speaking, the filming technique was very amateurish and unprofessional. However, thanks to the high-end long-lens shooting equipment, whether it was the high-speed capture or the number of frames, they were far beyond the imagination of ordinary people. Finally, after more than 4 hours, Zhou Xian finished watching the super long 4K video from beginning to end. After that, she used professional video editing software to do a comprehensive analysis of the entire video. When she returned to the page and saw the size of the file, she was dumbfounded. What kind of horrible equipment was used to film this? Also, where did this scene take place? Qin Guang, this unreasonable boss, where did he go to put on such a show? 3,600 frames per second 4K resolution, super perfect lighting and color restoration effect. Attention all high beings ahead. In this small memory card, the volume of the entire video file exceeded 100 terabytes. Not AG but AT. One document was equivalent to a lifetime's worth of savings for many people. In this world, is there such a perfect camera? How did it come about? What does Qin Guang mean by sneaking this memory card into my pocket? Also, although my computer's performance was good, under normal circumstances, it would not be able to recognize such a large external memory device, nor would it be able to play this video. What's so special about it? Zhou Xian tried to analyze the compression algorithm of the video file and was even more shocked. As one of the top 3 hackers in the world, she could not understand the compression algorithm of the file at all. Whether it was the performance of the hardware or the level of the software algorithm of the video file itself, the contents of this memory card completely exceeded her understanding and knowledge. It was so powerful that she began to doubt her own outlook on life. Wait, he had clearly left just now, but he purposely came back and secretly stuffed this memory card into my pocket. First of all, this indeed showed that he was very interested in Hai. My God. In the 4th episode. Second, this definitely meant that he was worried that the current footage would not reach the desired effect, so he purposely came back and put the memory card in my pocket. As for why he didn't say it in person, it was probably because the video was too strange and he really could not explain how it came about, so he purposely did this. After thinking through the key points, Zhou Xian immediately made a decision. At this time, the director finally finished shooting the scene outside. He came to the RV and knocked on the window. Chief Chu, are you inside? The scene is finished and there are a few guests who want to go back to the city. Chief Chu, do you want to take a look at the camera and decide whether or not to let them go? Zhou Xian opened the door and jumped out. She waved her hand. You came at the right time. That's fine too. Those who want to leave, arrange for a car to send them away. I have some footage here that Chief Chen gave me. Let's discuss how to integrate these scenes into the main film and improve the overall effect of the entire program. The director scratched his head blankly. Footage? What? Let me see. 15 minutes later, the director and the assistant director were also stunned in the temporary studio. What is this? Won't people think we are shooting a movie? This is too unreal. Will people believe it? In the face of everyone's doubts, Zhou Xian made a decision without hesitation. The footage is so real. What's there to believe? This was personally handed to me by Chief Chen. Did he make a mistake in his judgment of the program? We didn't meet expectations in the first 3 episodes, and we can't afford to lose this 4th episode. Zhou Xian made the decision. The next few days would be the post-production of the program. They might need to use the most powerful supercomputer in the country, the Light of the Moonlight Lake. Fortunately, the company was not short of money and could afford it. In the entire program, in addition to the PK scenes with the strongmen and weightlifting champions, and the stunts such as pulling the high-speed rail with his bare hands, they also had to embed the most important part of the long shot into the entire program. Zhou Xian had already thought about it. She would compress the length of the 4th episode and divide the entire program into 2 segments. The first half would be Hi. My God. The regular PK segment, the second half. Considering that Qin Guang had always been strong and domineering, Zhou Xian decided to directly name it Qin Guang's personal show time. At that time, when this footage was released, no matter whether people believed it or not or whether they would suspect that it was a computer stunt, It would definitely cause a global sensation. Whether it was doubt or crazy worship, it didn't matter. Based on my understanding of him, in the face of doubt, he would definitely come up with more real skills to prove everything, just like he did every time before. No matter how magical the picture in the memory card looked, Zhou Xian, as a fanatic in crazy worship of Qin Guang, did not hesitate to choose to believe that this footage was real. Although they didn't know where it happened, they didn't know where the phantom beasts he faced came from, and they didn't know the purpose of his battle with the phantom beasts. But this wasn't important. What he wanted was to put the camera on the show, and let the world recognize him like every time before, recognizing that he had an unparalleled and unsurpassable perfect body of all mankind. As a superfan who had always been paying attention to the almighty Superman, Zhou Xian really knew this guy too well. As for Qin Guang himself, he did not know what Zhou Xian was planning. He would not have thought that there would be a memory card in her pocket. This memory card contained scenes of him transforming into a bald warrior and fighting in the massacre world. In addition, the strangest thing about the whole matter was not just that. Previously in the massacre world, he had clearly transformed into a bald man that even she did not recognize. But now, the memory card was filled with his long hair and handsome enough to alarm the Jade Emperor himself. In addition, if Zhou Xian could still retain Peasant's memory, she would suddenly realize that these scenes were actually taken by her with the ultra-high-definition camera in her eyelashes after she received the side mission during the massacre mission. After getting off the plane, Qin Guang did not dare to delay. He drove the Bentley that was sent over by the Tianguang group and set off. The reason why he used a Bentley was that the car was not only fast but it also had a good driving feel. Its driving range was also far greater than that of a supercar. He first strolled around the Wujing city area and hurriedly visited every victim who was troubled by the assassin incident. After making sure that everyone's mental and physical state was fine, he directly rushed to Lilai County. He did not dare to let the security around everyone relax. It was also his own fault for making a mistake. Although the top 500 large organizations in the world had basically disappeared, the bounty was still there. No matter how afraid the other organizations were, it was hard to guarantee that some insignificant characters would hold the idea of going home and getting married after doing a bit of work. They would either be ill-informed or they would stubbornly insist on bumping into each other because they had nothing to lose. How could one not wet his shoes if he often walked by the river? Even the most powerful person could be knocked down by a brick in a street fight if he let his guard down. Qin Guang really could not bear the fact that the people around him were hurt because of him. When he arrived at Lilai County, it was already past midnight. He did not go to see the villa that had been blown up. Instead, he went straight to the hiding place of his relatives in his hometown, a very hidden underground fortification. If he had not reached his current status, he would never have known that there was such a large underground military fortification in Lilai County that could accommodate 3,000 people for more than 2 years. Of course, as far as he knew, it was built in only 4 months under the command of the old men above him after he made a name for himself. It could be to protect his family, but it could also be to monitor them. But this was not important. It was good that everyone had a tacit understanding. If people always thought about the worst of everything, it would be too tiring to live. Qin Guang anxiously drove the car into the hidden entrance of the underground fortification, which was like the mouth of a monster. Now he was a little nervous. From a small character to this day, his parents were finally implicated because of him. Who knew how frightened the two elders were right now? And he would definitely have to give them a harsh scolding. Scolding them was fine, but Qin Guang could not bear to see his parents panicking. It would make him feel a strong sense of self-blame.